Chapter 2608. Qiong Shao. The god of archery felt a bitter pain in his heart. He muttered, "Who killed you? Who is it? Who killed my Qiong Shao?" At this moment, the god of archery felt an inexplicable bitterness in his heart, as if it was about to split apart. The desire to protect that had accumulated in the depths of his heart all these years completely erupted at this moment. At this moment, his heart felt so sore that it was about to shatter into pieces. Then, it was a towering rage. It could no longer be contained. The god of archery suddenly roared into the sky, screaming hysterically, "Shui Leihun, you bastard, come out! Come out and fight with me!" The roar rose into the sky, thousands of miles in the sky, and the 8,000 rivers and mountains under the ground trembled at the same time. Between heaven and earth, murderous aura filled the air, suddenly turning into a raging wind, and the world was miserable. The god of archery stood steadily in the air, his clothes fluttering crazily in the wind. His gaze was as sharp as lightning, piercing through the sky in front of him for thousands of miles. Then he suddenly turned around and knocked an arrow on his bow. In the direction of the demon palace, with a heart full of grief, bitterness, and heartache, he shot an arrow that shocked the heavens, an arrow that shocked the heavens. At this moment, the arrow light was like the sharpest lightning formed in the air, but without any preparation process, it had already exploded. The most extreme explosion. There was a burst of mist, the void shattered, and starlight flickered chaotically. It was as if the entire universe had exploded at this moment. "Qiong Shao, no matter what, I will definitely avenge you." The god of archery's eyes were deep as he looked at the void. He muttered to himself. His heart felt like it was being torn apart again. It was as if he saw that gentle and cute girl in snow-white clothes again. She was right beside him, hugging his arm and acting coquettishly. "I'm not practicing today. I want to go out and play. Can you pick fruits for me to eat?" Okay. The god of archery's eyes became confused, and he muttered to himself with infinite kindness, "Little Qiong Shao, if you don't practice, let's go out and play. Let's go eat fruits, I'll listen to you." The raging wind in the sky was still raging. The wind swept away the clouds, and the gods and ghosts cried. The god of archery stood alone in the clouds in the sky, without moving. His clothes fluttered in the wind. Demon Palace. Shui Leihun was currently discussing countermeasures with the Demon Empress. Because in the past few days, the actions of the elves were too extreme, and the scale was getting bigger and bigger. The unavoidable atmosphere of the final battle was already evident. However, Zi Xiecheng was similarly unafraid of battle and didn't avoid it. She even had the will to fight without hesitation. The decisive battle between both parties was unavoidable. However, as the main party involved, the Eastern Emperor Demon Empress truly didn't wish for such an extreme situation to occur. Hence, they discussed possible countermeasures to resolve this calamity. Speaking of which, he wanted to resolve this calamity. It wasn't that difficult, as long as he could expose the sage's lies. As long as he exposed that absurd lie, not only would he be able to resolve the misunderstanding, but he would also have a great chance of obtaining the elves' help in dealing with the upcoming demonic calamity. Fabricating a lie might require a lot of thought and consideration, but it was not so troublesome to expose a lie. As long as one could find any flaw in the lie, one could make all the lies untrustworthy. Take the current situation as an example. The sage said that the fairy empress was caught because she saw through the affair of the Eastern Emperor Demon Empress. He also said that the fairy empress was pregnant with Shui Leihun's flesh and blood. These were all speculations, and although they weren't enough evidence, they were hard to refute. Coincidentally, Meng Qi was Shui Leihun's brother through a blood contract. This point was also irrefutable. However, there was a section that emphasized the fact that Chu Yang was the illegitimate son of the Eastern Sovereign and the Demon Empress. This point was a huge flaw. Chu Yang was a purebred human, and definitely not a hybrid between the human race and the demon race. Just this point alone was enough to completely expose the saint's lie. Actually, with the sage's wisdom, the big lie that he painstakingly fabricated shouldn't have such a flaw. However, the sage was used to reading people's minds. When Chu Yang first entered the imperial court, he entered the secular world from the Eastern Emperor heaven. When he entered the secular world, he was only a small heaven level. Later on, there were many unforeseen events, and his cultivation broke through consecutively. Especially in the battle against the Yuanma Road, Chu Yang didn't hesitate to kill the enemy. He had already stepped on the road to the netherworld, but he was rescued by Shui Leihan. This was originally a secret, but it was found out by the sage after careful investigation. At that time, Yuan Tianji's identity as the heavenly demon wasn't exposed, and Shui Leihan was still willing to save him. If there wasn't such a huge relationship, how could it be possible? Later on, the Heavenly Armament Pavilion's influence swept the entire imperial court. Only the Eastern Emperor Heaven had no trace of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. What did this mean? And as the base of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion in the Demon Emperor Heaven, the Demon Empress Du Yao Ningning was willing to be a concubine and flattered Big Brother Chu Yang blindly. What did this mean? Such facts all proved one thing. Chu Yang's position in the heart of the Eastern Emperor Demon Empress was special. He might be even more important than her biological son. What could be more important than her biological son? It seemed that it could only be an illegitimate son. Therefore, the sage was sure that Chu Yang was the illegitimate son of the Eastern Emperor and the Demon Empress. This was something that the sage himself was sure of. As for the fact that Chu Yang didn't have the characteristics of the demon race, it was too easy to explain. There were many treasures in the world, and it wasn't easy to find something that could cover up certain characteristics. The sage himself could casually make 3 to 7 of them. Therefore, the sage was very certain that Chu Yang was the illegitimate son of the Eastern Emperor Demon Empress. He believed that the degree of credibility was even higher than the ridiculous speculation that the blood contract was the Eastern Emperor's brother. Therefore, there were really too many things in this world that one couldn't think of. The Demon Empress and the Eastern Emperor knew that Chu Yang didn't have the slightest bit of blood relationship with them. Therefore, asking Chu Yang to come out and explain this scam was the best strategy to deal with the current situation. However, Chu Yang's whereabouts were unknown, and they didn't know when he would return. This was instead the biggest problem. Therefore, Shui Leihan and the Demon Empress discussed whether they should spread out their manpower to find Chu Yang as soon as possible, so as to prevent any undue delay from causing an irreversible bad situation. However, at this moment, the two of them heard that long howl at the same time. It's the elf race's god of archery. Even with the Demon Empress' composure, her expression couldn't help but change. Then, they heard that heart-wrenching yell, "Shui Leihan, come out! Fight with me!" Hearing that, Shui Leihan's face sank. His displeasure was evident in his words. The entanglement in the Eastern Emperor's heart at this moment was really indescribable. Oh heavens, oh earth, this clearly has nothing to do with me. But now, how did it develop to such an extent? From this long howl, it was completely obvious that the elf god of archery had obviously been agitated by grief to the point that he had lost his rationality. To such a person, no matter how strong the explanation was, it was all useless. Shui Leihan was already very, very angry. If it wasn't for the fact that he was worried about the impending battle with the extraterrestrial demons, he would have already rushed out at this moment. I'm the great Eastern Emperor. How can I be an ordinary person who can be mentioned by your mouth like this? How dare you challenge me like this? It'd be strange if I don't let you know why the flowers are so red. Just as Shui Leihan was filled with depression and had nowhere to vent it, another unforeseen event occurred. An ominous sign had arrived. The Eastern Emperor and the Demon Empress expressions changed at the same time. They attacked at the same time. A ray of light flashed. An arrow that was extremely fast pierced through the air and arrived. Wherever the arrow passed, the ceiling of the demon palace suddenly exploded with a loud bang. This sudden and shocking arrow, as if it had a life of its own, brought along a sky full of thunderbolts as it poured down crazily. Boom! The Demon Empress and Shui Leihan both attacked at the same time to intercept the arrow. Their bodies actually shook. That arrow had already been completely crushed by their hands and turned into fine powder, no longer existing in this world. However, that arrow had still destroyed the demon imperial palace. Destroying the demon palace with one arrow. This was the strength of the elven archer god. But it was the same arrow that provoked two great kings at the same time. Two of the most powerful experts in the world. Looking at the fine powder in his palm, Xue Leihan's gaze became even colder. His expression was equally cold, as if his entire person was frozen. The coldness was so cold that it seemed to be able to freeze everything and seal the world in ice. Anything could be tolerated for the sake of the big picture. But this time, he could no longer tolerate it. Elven archer god, you've gone too far. Then, a cold murderous aura erupted from his body and shot straight into the sky. Calm down, don't be rash. The demon empress didn't finish her sentence. Xue Leihan had already leaped up and instantly soared into the sky. Then, his voice could be heard from high up in the sky, with a strong sense of anger. Archer god, I'm coming. This is bad. The demon empress complained in her heart. Although the situation was bad, there was still room for control. In fact, just now, the two of them had already decided to find Chu Yang as soon as possible and expose the saint's deception to completely end this huge lie. However, the arrow of the god of archery had truly pushed the situation to the point where it could no longer be salvaged. The moment Xue Leihan rushed out in a rage, the situation had completely gone out of control. The demon empress was very anxious. She leaped out and followed closely behind him. Maybe she could still salvage this dangerous situation. The demon empress still held on to the last bit of luck. The archer god's clothes were as white as snow. He stood proudly in the sky. His gaze was cold and sharp like an arrow as he stared in the direction of the demon palace. The expression on his face was like a 10,000-year-old ice, eternally unmoving, eternally unchanging. The wind was still howling. There were no clouds at all, but suddenly, the wind and clouds gathered again in midair. Countless clouds madly rushed over from all directions. Even though there was a raging gale that swept the clouds away, the clouds that filled the sky continued to advance, one after the other, without end. When the Eastern Emperor moved, the world was shocked. In the land of thunder and lightning, the Lord of the Eastern Royal Sky, Donghuang Xue Leihan, flew over from afar. In the blink of an eye, he was already in front of the archer god, standing with his hands behind his back. With the same cold gaze, he looked at the archer god in front of him. The aura of a ruler that swept through the world, the aura of a ruler that controlled the universe, filled the universe and filled the world. Chapter 2609. Even though he was boiling with anger and hatred, the god of archery couldn't help but praise him in his heart. This aura was indeed worthy of the East Sovereign's reputation. If he had a choice, he might not be willing to fight to the death with this person before him. You want to fight with me? Fight to the death? Xue Leihan stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes like lightning piercing through the night sky. Xue Leihan. The god of archery stood with his bow in hand, his eyes like ancient ice, sharp and cold. He stared at Xue Leihan and said, "Don't you have anything to say?" Xue Leihan sneered. In the face of provocation, even if I want to say something, I'll say it after the battle. The god of archery sneered. Whether you say it or not, we'll have to fight anyway. What's the difference? At this point, no one could afford to lose their dignity. Since things had come to this point, even though all the misunderstandings had been cleared up, this battle was destined to be unavoidable. No matter who backed down, they would have to face the consequences of losing their reputation in the Heaven Imperial Court. Such a great humiliation was destined to be unbearable for either of them. Even if I'm innocent and there's a misunderstanding and a conspiracy, I'll have to explain the whole story after I defeat you. Before the battle, I won't explain, I won't bother to explain, I won't explain. This was the pride of the East Sovereign. Even if I hate you, even if I know all your sins, I'll only tell the world after I defeat you. He even prayed to the spirits of the dead. I have already avenged you and wiped out your hatred. This was the pride of the god of archery. Right and wrong were just now, they were no longer important. What was important was always the strength of this battle. Everyone understood this unreasonable principle. They all understood, they all understood, they all understood. The bigger the fist, the bigger the reason. This was the unchanging principle of the Heaven Imperial Court. It had never been easy. I've long heard that the elves are arrogant and conceited. Today, I've finally seen it. Hearing about them is indeed better than meeting them in person. Shui Leihan stood with his hands behind his back. He looked at the god of archery coldly. I've long wanted to experience the 4 elven gods. God of archery, why don't you ask the other 3 to come out? The arrow god roared, I alone am enough to deal with you. Shui Leihan narrowed his eyes and interrupted, You're not human. You're an elf. Not a human, but an elf. The arrow god suddenly felt his heart tremble. Boundless hatred surged out crazily. He seemed to have understood something at that moment. He gritted his teeth and said, Back then, you used this reason to harm Qiong Shao, right? Shui Leihan became even more irritated. He said hatefully, If you want to fight, then let's fight. What's there to be long-winded about? After the battle, I will naturally tell you all the truth. But now, facing you, I have nothing to say no matter what. The god of archery, however, let out a heart-rending laugh. Shui Leihan, good. Let us use this battle to announce it to the world. Clarify the rights and wrongs of the past 1,000,000 years. These millions of years of love and hatred. How can a pair of hands cover the sky forever? So, the demon empress finally arrived. Her white robes fluttered as she suddenly landed in between the two of them. She frowned and said, What? He hadn't even finished speaking 3 sentences, and they were going to start fighting? I really don't know what you men are thinking. Demon Empress. The god of archery turned his head fiercely and looked at the enchanting and beautiful woman in front of him. His eyes lit up in shock. Then, the anger in his eyes became even stronger than before. He said hatefully, You're here too. The demon empress said coldly, This is my territory. Is it strange that I'm here? The god of archery nodded slowly and said word by word, Good. Looking at this extremely beautiful woman, the god of archery seemed to see how his most beloved Qiong Shao was defeated by this woman and was dejected. How she was hunted down and fled to the ends of the world, unable to even return to the elf forest. In the end, how her heart was broken and her soul was broken, how she died and how she died. The god of archery let out a long howl. His voice was sharp and piercing through the sky. However, he forcefully interrupted his thoughts and stopped himself from thinking about it. He shouted, Dong Huang, let's fight. His whole body floated up and suddenly turned into exploding fireworks in the air. After the fireworks, the figure of the elf god of archery, who was originally standing in mid-air, disappeared. However, countless green longbows suddenly appeared in the sky. They were densely packed, and they didn't stop until the end of the world. In the blink of an eye, the wind and clouds surged in the sky as if the heavens were moved. Such momentum caused all the peak experts who had noticed this battle to focus their gazes on this place. The god of archery versus Dong Huang. To the Heaven Imperial Court, this was the pinnacle battle of the century. Whether it was the elf tribe, Demon Emperor Heaven, Heavenly Armament Pavilion, or Saint Emperor Palace, they all noticed the strange phenomenon and naturally focused all their attention here. The god of archery wasn't worried that the Demon Empress would team up with Dong Huang. Under such circumstances, even if Dong Huang was killed on the spot, the Demon Empress couldn't attack. Once she attacked, her reputation would be ruined. Hence, the god of archery didn't have this concern at all. Once he attacked with all his might. Dong Huang took a step forward and suddenly raised his head. At this moment, the battle intent of the two filled the sky and collided fiercely in the air. At the same time, the murderous aura also collided. The air surged. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The thousands of miles of mountains and rivers under their feet actually ignited into a huge fire at the same time. Their battle intent and murderous aura directly ignited the thousands of miles of land under their feet. Amidst the fire, Shui Leihan stood alone in the sky, facing the endless longbows that extended to the end of the sky, with his hands behind his back. Everyone held their breaths at this moment. Just when everyone didn't see anything, Dong Huang moved. He slowly took a step forward and casually slammed his palm in front of him. With a crack, an arrow appeared in the air, but it had already been broken into two. The god of archery had already attacked. An arrow shot out without a sound. Dong Huang, on the other hand, had already neutralized the opponent's silent attack. The longbows of sky were really too densely arranged. No one actually saw which bow shot the arrow. No one even saw which bow the god of archery was controlling. Xue Leihan looked as if he was taking a stroll. One arrow after another was crushed by his palm. However, the number of longbows in the air didn't decrease at all. Instead, the frequency of arrows appearing became faster and faster. Xue Leihan was still calm and composed. It was as if he had already grasped the rhythm of the god of archery's shooting. Even though the sky was full of arrows like rain, he only needed to raise his hands lightly to avoid them all, or even smash them into pieces. God of archery! Xue Leihan stopped in his tracks. 3 arrows turned into powder in front of him again. Show me your true abilities. If that was all there was to it, then there's no need to continue today's battle anymore. A clear whistle faintly sounded in the air. The voice of the god of archery could be heard. Dong Huang is indeed Dong Huang. You really have the ability to be so arrogant. Then, the hundreds of millions of longbows in the air were drawn to a full moon at the same time. The next moment, hundreds of millions of arrows left the bowstrings at the same time. At this moment, the rain of arrows was even denser than a rainstorm. With a smile on his face, Xue Leihan actually didn't dodge at all. He stood in the air and let the rain of arrows hit him. Seeing this, everyone was extremely surprised. The opponent is already going all out. Why aren't you moving? Could it be that you're so scared that you can't move after seeing the other party's large-scale indiscriminate attack? It definitely can't be that you're so scared that you can't move, because in the next moment, everyone saw an unbelievable scene. They saw those lightning-like arrows flying forward at high speed, but in reality, they were retreating at high speed. It was as if the whole universe was being pulled back by a mysterious force, completely irresistible. The strange force had completely sucked this part of the world into a vacuum, forming a special funnel. And the tip of the funnel was somewhere in the distance. All of the arrows that were clearly flying at lightning speed were actually moving backwards towards the tip of the funnel. This strong visual difference made everyone who noticed this scene feel as if their hearts were being smashed by a huge hammer. Many of them were extremely upset. They spat out a mouthful of blood and didn't dare to continue watching the battle. Those who weren't strong enough weren't even qualified to watch this battle of the century. It was indeed a world where the bigger fist was the bigger reason. The arrows retreated at high speed, and the longbows also gradually disappeared. Finally, they completely disappeared. Everything was densely packed together. In an instant, it was visible to the naked eye and turned into the stars in the sky. And the figure of the god of archery still didn't appear, not even a trace of him. Between heaven and earth, it was empty. On the battlefield of the two, there seemed to be only Xue Leihan alone. Other than the East Emperor, that empty vacuum funnel was also there. Xue Leihan was standing at the edge of the funnel, narrowing his eyes and staring at the tip of the funnel. His expression was calm and cautious, but he wasn't nervous at all. The god of archery was indeed an unprecedentedly strong opponent. Xue Leihan didn't deny this point. But he wasn't afraid at all. Before an arrow was released, he had already retracted all the arrows that were shot out and guided them over. And he had even turned all the arrows that were released earlier into the momentum that hadn't been released yet. These arrows were all shot out by him. What kind of earth-shattering cultivation and unimaginable ability was this? Everyone who was still qualified and capable to watch the battle unconsciously held their breaths. They were waiting for the arrival of that earth-shattering moment. But they didn't know if there would be an even more unimaginable scene. The sky was eternal. The wind and clouds seemed to have completely stopped. Finally, the sky was still the sky, as if nothing had changed. But everyone subconsciously understood one thing. The god of archery had made his move. Although they couldn't see where the arrows were at all, everyone was very aware of it. Because in that instant, everyone's heart suddenly trembled. Everyone was like this. It was an extremely strong feeling of palpitations. Chapter 26:10. Xue Leihan's body also shook suddenly at that moment. Space, it was as if the entire space had been completely shattered. Everyone's vision was filled with space cracks, densely packed, black and white, flashing nonstop. They all felt that time and space had been completely messed up at this moment. After a moment, the sky suddenly became clear again and the horizon was bright again. Xue Leihan was still standing upright in the air with his hands behind his back. As if he didn't even make a move just now. On the opposite side, in the horizon, a figure slowly appeared, gradually approaching. The voice belonging to the arrow god sounded again. Xue Leihan, today's battle is temporarily over. In the future, we will fight to the death in the Tianen forest. Do you dare to come? Xue Leihan smiled slightly. A mere Tianen forest, nothing more than that. Do you think you can destroy my East Royal family? Pa. There was a long laugh. The archer god looked at him deeply and did not speak again. His body suddenly turned into a long rainbow and disappeared in an instant. With his hands behind his back, Xue Leihan watched the arrow god leave. Then his white robe fluttered and he quietly floated down from the sky, disappearing in a flash. All the spectators were speechless for a long time. The battle just now, in that instant, must have been very intense and shocking. But what exactly happened in that instant? No one saw it. They only knew that the arrow god had made a move. Xue Leihan had also made a move. Both sides had already decided the outcome, or perhaps there was a slight difference in strength between them. But today was obviously not the day for the final battle. After all, there were billions of people below. Once they lost control, it would probably cause a terrible disaster. The biggest possibility was that when facing each other and exchanging their strongest attacks, both sides had realized it. Facing such a powerful enemy, it was impossible to completely control their strength and prevent it from leaking out. There would definitely be a considerable degree of loss of control. For super experts at their level, even the slightest leakage of their power could cause a great disaster. Not to mention the disaster caused by the destructive power of the two sides at the critical moment when their extreme powers collided. Therefore, both sides tacitly chose to stop temporarily and agreed to fight again later. Actually, it wasn't just ordinary martial artists. Even peak experts like the Demon Empress didn't see the specific situation of that battle at all. They didn't see how the arrow got attacked. He didn't see how Xue Leihan had withstood it either. This didn't mean that the Demon Empress cultivation was weaker than Xue Leihan or the arrow god. It was just that, if one wasn't in the situation, it was very difficult to have the most direct feeling. Those involved could not see clearly, but they could feel it directly. Those watching from the sidelines could see it clearly, but they did not feel the pressure and murderous aura. Therefore, the onlookers may not be affected, and the people involved may not be confused. Xue Leihan's face darkened. They returned to the Demon Emperor Palace. The Demon Empress, who had returned first, immediately welcomed him. "How is it?" the Demon Empress asked. "He's indeed an unprecedentedly strong opponent." Xue Leihan was silent for a moment before he finally answered. He slowly stretched out his hand. In the middle of Donghuang's palm, there was a burn mark. That was the mark left behind by the arrow. The archer god is so strong? It can actually harm you. The Demon Empress was truly astonished. In the entire Heaven Imperial Court, Donghuang Xue Leihan's cultivation level was only below Sage Yunshangren. Although the Demon Empress was very arrogant, she also knew that she was slightly inferior to Xue Leihan. If the elf archer god's strength was above Donghuang's, wouldn't he be at the same level as Yunshangren? The number one expert of the elf race, the head of the four gods, is indeed not to be trifled with. However, his cultivation level is still below mine, and even slightly inferior to yours. Xue Leihan frowned and sighed softly. If it was a battle of life and death, I would definitely be able to kill him. Definitely be able to kill him? Are you serious? The demon empress' eyes lit up. It's just that after I kill him, I'll definitely be met with his final counterattack. My cultivation level will definitely fall by more than half, or even most of it. Xue Leihan frowned and said solemnly, other than the loss of my cultivation level, my realm will also fall. I'm afraid I'll fall all the way to the level of a saint. Besides, there will also be damage to my soul. All these losses can never be recovered. Therefore, in terms of the result, the archer god is dead, Donghuang is dead, and only Xue Leihan is still alive. Because the archer god's arrow was imbued with the power of creation. Xue Leihan heaved a sigh of relief. Moreover, regarding the way of hidden weapons, I've never dabbled in it before. I've never thought that someone would actually cultivate this kind of hidden weapon to such an earth-shattering level. This is the most difficult thing to do. If it were someone else, it might not be so difficult. However, Donghuang had always been upright and upright. Even though he knew about hidden weapons, even his hidden weapons were used for direct combat, just like the viburnum flower when he replaced Xie Danqiong previously. Hiss, the demon empress gasped upon hearing this. According to what Donghuang said, if this was really the case, wouldn't it mean that the latter half of his life would be ruined? If Donghuang lost more than half of his cultivation level now, then would he still be Donghuang in the future? The level of a saint was nothing in the eyes of the top experts in the Heaven Imperial Court now? Could it be that His Majesty Donghuang was going to hide in the palace forever and never come out? Wouldn't that become the biggest joke in the history of the Heaven Imperial Court? However, as long as he came out, how many people would want to kill him and replace him? At that time, against the enemies who dared to fight for the position of the Heavenly Emperor, the cultivation of a saint would definitely not have the ability to resist at all. Even the slightest chance of a fluke would not exist. He would definitely die. As expected, the arrow god died, and so did Donghuang. When is the final battle? The demon empress frowned. The exact time? I'll go with you then. Xue Leihan patted her hand lightly and smiled. There's no need for that. I can handle it myself. His expression was indifferent, but naturally, there was a sense of, I've already made up my mind and cannot change it. Seeing this, the demon empress sighed in a daze. She knew that Xue Leihan would definitely not agree to her coming along. Almost at the same time, the Heavenly Armament Pavilion welcomed a long-awaited guest. Zi Xiecheng was extremely surprised. Xie Danqiong? Why are you here? Zi Xiecheng asked in surprise. According to Emo Tianji's intelligence, Xie Danqiong had already returned to Moyan Sky to calm the people and prepare for the battle against the extraterrestrial demons. Why did he suddenly appear here? What was going on? I've already been here for 3 days. Xie Danqiong's handsome face had a hint of calm determination. Especially the battle just now, I've also seen it. You've also seen the battle just now? Zi Xiecheng was very interested. Then what do you think of the outcome of their battle? Xie Danqiong thought for a while and said, maybe Donghuang's strength has a slight upper hand, but the final situation is still a situation where both sides suffer. There won't be a winner. Zi Xiecheng nodded and said, I think so too. Even if Donghuang can kill the arrow god, his own strength will inevitably be reduced by more than half. Xie Danqiong was silent for a while and said, actually, boss and the rest don't know that I'm here. After saying that, he raised his head and looked at Zi Xiecheng quietly. Hearing this, Zi Xiecheng instantly became alert. Xie Danqiong, what do you mean by this, and what do you want to do? Xie Danqiong said calmly, my current cultivation has once again taken a step forward. In the extreme heaven, Boss pointed out to me the path that belongs to me, and I've been searching for it. When I left the big Western paradise, I was pleasantly surprised to find that I've already found it. So, no matter whether it's the realm or the cultivation, it has already reached a new height. He said quietly, my current cultivation realm is already not inferior to Demon Empress Donghuang's. Zi Xiecheng said angrily, don't talk about those useless things. I'm not asking about your cultivation, but what do you want to do? Tell me the truth. In this battle, even if Donghuang can avoid both sides suffering, his strength will also be greatly reduced. This is not the outcome I want to see. Xie Danqiong said lightly, so, I want to fight on behalf of Donghuang. Zi Xiecheng was so angry that she laughed. Does Shui Leihan know that you want to fight on behalf of Donghuang? Do you think he will agree? It doesn't matter whether he knows or not, this is not important. Xie Danqiong insisted. But I must go. Zi Xiecheng stared at this stubborn person in front of her, and a sense of helplessness rose in her heart. If it was Chu Yang, she could still use force to suppress him. Even if she couldn't defeat him with her real strength, she still had an absolutely effective sure-kill technique. But the person in front of her was Xie Danqiong, Chu Yang's best brother. What could she do? On the day of Mo Yuntian's ascension ceremony, it was Donghuang who appeared and pretended to be me, so that I wouldn't be humiliated. Xie Danqiong looked up and said softly, but, to me, that kind of avoidance is also a kind of avoidance. At that time, I swore that if one day Donghuang is in trouble, I will also replace him once. I have always kept this oath in my heart. This favor, I must repay it. I will repay it myself, personally. Xie Danqiong said quietly, actually, this is no longer a simple oath, but my inner demon. Inner demon? Zi Xiecheng's heart suddenly shook, and she stared at Xie Danqiong. Xie Danqiong looked back at her quietly. Zi Xiecheng's heart trembled. She could clearly see the regret in Xie Danqiong's heart. It was a kind of pain that external forces could never make up for. The ascension ceremony was replaced by someone else. Xie Danqiong had always been brooding about this. No matter how unafraid he was of death at that time, it wasn't something that could be dealt with by death. Even if the world didn't know, Xie Danqiong himself knew. It was easy to lie to others, but difficult to lie to himself. After all, he had escaped once. After escaping that time, he should have borne it himself. So, no matter what, he must bear it for Shui Leihan once. After that time, Xie Danqiong's state of mind would then have a day of perfection. But this time, he was facing the elf archer god. A terrifying expert whose strength was not inferior to Donghuang at all. A peak expert, a legend of the elf race. An opponent that even Shui Leihan himself wasn't confident of dealing with. Could Xie Danqiong do it? Chapter 26:11. I've already mastered the viburnum heavenly technique and gradually entered the realm of non-life and reality everywhere. Xie Danqiong said quietly, now, I don't have any viburnum flowers in my hands, but as long as I want, the whole world and all living things can become viburnum flowers in my hands. I've already surpassed the level of tangible viburnum flowers. Xie Danqiong said seriously, believe me, I can definitely do it. Zi Xiecheng rubbed her brows. She had always been decisive and decisive. No matter what she did, she had never been sloppy. But this time, she really didn't know how to react. Support? Too dangerous. Really too dangerous. Object? No way, absolutely not. It concerns Xie Danqiong's future, how could she object? I can't make the decision on this matter. Zi Xiecheng frowned and said, I need to discuss it with Chu Yang. Xie Danqiong said, this matter can't be told to Big Brother and the rest. And even if they know, it's too late to stop it. Xie Danqiong said, I've just asked them. They're already on their way here, and they're moving very fast. They'll reach here in about 5 days. Based on the current situation, we can definitely hold on until they arrive. But even if Big Brother uses the most extreme method to rush here again, using the method of becoming one with the sword, it'll take him at least 3 days to reach here. By the time he arrives, everything will be over. I don't have that time. Xie Danqiong's handsome face was full of determination. He said, so, I only need your support, sister-in-law. Zi Xiecheng held her forehead helplessly. But you have to understand, I can't support your crazy action at all. I even want to use force to subdue you now and stop your obviously impulsive decision. Especially if you really do this. Your big brother will definitely not forgive you. Nor will he forgive me. Xie Danqiong blinked and said, then we'll just not let them know. This matter will be a secret between the two of us. Zi Xiecheng frowned in distress. Absolutely not. I've said it just now, when they arrive, this battle has already ended. This battle has already ended. They can't change this battle. Only I can, Xie Danqiong said. No matter what you say, I won't allow it. Zi Xiecheng objected firmly. The archer god is too scary. Even if you have improved a lot now, you are still not his match. If by any chance something happens to her, how am I going to explain it to sister-in-law and Danfeng? How are you going to explain this to your elder brother? Xie Danqiong said, but you and I both know that this battle is imperative. Now, nothing could change that. This might be my last chance to represent Donghuang. If I lose this battle, my inner demons will haunt me forever, and I will never be able to get rid of them. Zi Xiecheng raised her eyebrows and sighed. That's true. Let me think of a way. Maybe there's a way to satisfy both sides. Xie Danqiong nodded. She said, thank you, sister-in-law, for your help. Before she finished her words, Zi Xiecheng suddenly struck. Xie Danqiong's body flew up into the sky like a sandbag. Zi Xiecheng's moves were as fast as lightning. She continuously sealed all of Xie Danqiong's meridians, blood vessels, joints, even his divine soul was sealed. His divine sense was also sealed. He didn't want to let go of even the slightest bit of oversight. Dong! Xie Danqiong landed like a sack, staring at Zi Xiecheng with wide eyes. His eyes were full of depression and surprise. But now his entire body was sealed. It seemed like he didn't even have the ability to speak. He could only use his eyes to express his dissatisfaction. At the last moment, Zi Xiecheng finally decided to use the most barbaric method that she was best at to stop him. Thinking about it this way, her thoughts were instantly clear. Zi Xiecheng kicked this newly ascended heavenly emperor in cloud and said fiercely, "You're so bold. You actually came to my place and asked me to help you send yourself to death. Xie Danqiong, you're so bold, so bold. Why didn't I see it in the past? You even asked me to keep some secret between the two of us. How did you figure it out?" As she spoke, she seemed to be getting angrier. She punched and kicked all the way, beating Xie Danqiong until he was rolling around like a sandbag. "I asked you to send yourself to death. I asked you to send yourself to death. I asked you to send yourself to death." After scolding him, she kicked him dozens of times. Her anger hadn't subsided yet. "You think that I'm embarrassed to hit you, this uncle? You think that I'll give you face just because you call me sister-in-law? So you actually said that you want to send yourself to death in front of me? I might as well kill you, so that you won't die in the hands of outsiders." Zi Xiecheng roared angrily. Xie Danqiong was beaten until he was rolling around like a sandbag. He felt so wrong that he only wanted to cry. When did I say that I want to send myself to death? I only said that I want to fight on behalf of East Sovereign, okay? I already said that I'm confident. How did it become helping me to send myself to death? No matter what, it's not sending myself to death. I'm really confident, very confident, sister-in-law, Xie Danqiong wailed in his heart, but he couldn't say a single word. He was kicked up into the air, landed on the ground, kicked up again and rolled in the air. Before he landed, he was kicked up again. He really didn't expect this sister-in-law's temper to be so explosive. Why was she so explosive? She usually looks like a quiet person. Otherwise, how would I dare to come? But no. Xie Danqiong was being beaten up while feeling aggrieved and wronged. But as he thought about it, he suddenly almost laughed out loud. Boss found such a wife. He would definitely suffer in the future. That's not right. It seemed that this situation had happened to Boss a long time ago. Maybe it had happened more than once. No wonder Boss treated Jianghu and sister-in-law Butian differently, but towards this sister-in-law Xiecheng he was faintly respectful and fearful. I see. This situation has to be kept a secret for Boss. The main thing is to not let him know and kill me. It's just that. I only know now. It seems that it's a little too late. When Xie Danqiong thought of this, he felt like crying again to vent the sadness in his chest. But now he couldn't even shed a tear. In the hall, many people were dumbfounded. Their eyebrows twitched as they watched their sister-in-law beating up Heavenly Emperor Mo Yun crazily. Their hearts were inexplicably shocked. So fierce. The other party is a Heavenly Emperor. Beating him up like he was beating a child, wasn't that a little too valiant? Just as they were thinking, Zi Xiecheng scolded while panting. As the saying goes, the eldest brother is like the father, the eldest sister-in-law is like the mother. Xie Danqiong, I'm beating you for your own good. You have to know how to be grateful, understand? As soon as he said this, everyone fell to the ground. Zi Xiecheng beat him up like a thunderbolt and finally vented her anger. Only then did she stop. With a wave of her hand, she said domineeringly, "Take this bastard in and lock him in the confinement room. No need to give him food and water. He won't die of hunger or thirst. After 10 days, let him out. If he forgets, it's okay to lock him up for 3 to 7 days." Everyone couldn't help but tremble. They stood up straight and received the order. You even dare to beat up a heavenly emperor like this? Let alone us. Thinking about it, it was still not safe. Zi Xiecheng said again, "Oh right, you, quickly bring the dragon tendons over and tie this guy up for 20 to 30 rounds. Tie him up tightly. There's no need to think about solving problems in the future. It's fine as long as there are no mistakes." Xie Danqiong groaned inwardly. He had barged in and was immediately put down. He didn't have any chance at all. Zi Xiecheng walked to the front of Xie Danqiong and bent down. With a fierce look, she threatened him. "Xie Danqiong, listen up. If you don't stop and create any trouble, don't blame me for directly ordering people to strip you naked and throw you into the brothel. Then I'll call my sister-in-law over to see your ugly state." Xie Danqiong suddenly shuddered. He opened his mouth wide as he looked at his sister-in-law. His impression of her had always been gentle, virtuous, and magnanimous. He was dumbstruck. He was flabbergasted. His eyes were crooked, and he was at a loss of what to do. At this moment, his whole body was really twitching and convulsing. If he could move, Xie Danqiong really wanted to hit the ground with his head. "Boss, what kind of wife have you found?" Seeing that Xie Danqiong was taken away, Zi Xiecheng finally heaved a sigh of relief. She muttered, "Little guy, you actually dare to talk nonsense in front of me about wanting to replace Donghuang. You really don't know what death is. If the fairy archer god can't kill you, I'll make you half dead first." Then she walked back excitedly. "Let's go. Send a message to the Tianji Intelligence Department and let them tell Chu Yang, Mo Tianji and the rest that I've already completely controlled Xie Danqiong. There will definitely be no accidents." In the sky, Chu Yang and the others were hurrying on their way. As Mo Tianji hurried along, he remotely controlled the Tianji Intelligence Department to receive information and constantly send out new orders. He constantly reported new information to Chu Yang and the rest. Listening to the latest news, the situation seemed to be developing in a direction that was getting worse and worse. Chu Yang and the rest became more and more anxious. Naturally, they couldn't wait to rush to the Demon Emperor Heaven and resolve the situation before them. Just as their hearts were heavy, Mo Tianji, who was walking in the middle of the group, suddenly burst into laughter. This laughter was fine, but everyone's scalp instantly exploded. Damn, what's going on? Why did the great swindler suddenly make such a commotion? Mo Tianji had always been able to remain calm even if a mountain collapsed in front of him. This time, he was actually laughing wildly while walking. This was something that had never happened before. Could it be that this guy was too nervous and the situation was extremely serious, so he lost his mind, broke down and went crazy? What's going on? What's going on? Even Chu Yang asked with some trepidation. Haha. Mo Tianji laughed so hard that he almost fell from the sky. He rubbed his stomach and gasped for breath. "I'm dying of laughter. I can't take it anymore. I'm dying of laughter. I have to laugh for a while. Otherwise, I really can't speak. You guys wait for a while." Everyone was confused. What could be so funny? Chapter 26:12. Could it be that the Saint Monarch suddenly died? Or that the heavenly devil emperor self-destructed? GMO guess. You're dreaming, thinking of such ridiculous things. Everyone despised him. No, it's Xie Danqiong. Haha. Mo Tianji laughed until tears came out of his eyes. His whole body trembled. This bastard, he told us that he went back to the Ink Cloud Heaven, But in the end he secretly went to the Demon Emperor Heaven behind our backs, wanting to fight the enemy on behalf of Donghuang. Everyone was shocked. Then they scolded in unison. This bastard actually dared to lie to us. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. We'll beat him to death when we see him again. This bastard Xie Tuesday. How petty is this gigolo? He's so crooked. Everyone rubbed their palms together. Mo Tianji laughed until he fell. Everyone, don't be so excited. Someone has already taught this bastard a lesson. Ha, what happened? Who did it? Everyone asked. This bastard wants to fight on behalf of Donghuang, but he doesn't have the confidence to do it alone. It's mainly in terms of disguise, so he needs someone to help him. After thinking about it, he went to look for sister-in-law when we weren't around. Mo Tianji wiped the tears from his laughter. This bastard actually thought that sister-in-law has a good temper. After he went, he actually made it clear. He said that he wants to fight on behalf of Shui Leihan, and asked for sister-in-law's help. What? Zi Xiecheng has a good temper? Chu Yang shuddered when he heard that. He said, then this bastard's ending will definitely be very miserable. It's more than miserable. Mo Tianji still couldn't stop laughing. After he went, sister-in-law was first put in a difficult position. She couldn't reason with him, so she agreed to help. Then she caught him off guard and restrained him. It said that someone was beaten up by sister-in-law for as long as 2 hours. She directly beat this heavenly emperor Mo Yun from a gigolo to a chubby face. Anyway, his face is very chubby. Haha. Everyone burst into laughter. In the midst of their journey, they actually heard such explosive news. It was really too satisfying. Thinking about the process of Xie Danqiong being beaten up from a gigolo to a chubby face. Everyone was imagining it in their minds. The more they imagined it, the more satisfied they felt. Right now, our great Emperor Jasperflower has been beaten so fat that she can't even move. There are also 7 or 8 dragon tendons tied around her body. He was tied up like a rice dumpling and locked in the innermost room of the Demon Emperor's heavenly weapon pavilion. He was waiting for us to visit him. Mo Tianji was taking joy in other people's misfortune. He was laughing so hard that his eyebrows couldn't be seen. All the brothers swore to the heavens that this was the first time in their lives that they had seen Mo Tianji show such an expression. However, everyone's expressions were even more exaggerated than Mo Tianji's. Awu awu ha. Luo Kadi was intoxicated by this news. I never thought that I would have such a good day. This is really too good. I can totally imagine Xie Danqiong's expression right now. I'm so excited that I'm about to faint. Ha! Xie Tu, you also have such a day. God has opened his eyes. Sister Z is really good. Ji Mo's eyebrows danced in delight. This matter is really too awesome. Everyone burst into laughter in the air. Everyone was refreshed and took joy in other people's misfortune. They were all discussing when they saw Xie Danqiong again. How should he ridicule someone? Such a great opportunity might not come again in the future. If they couldn't mock him to their heart's content, it would be such a pity and such a waste. Chu Yang, Mo Qingwu, Tai Budian and Wu Chanxian were also laughing so hard that they couldn't catch their breath. Big Sister Z has a good temper. Chu Yang wanted to laugh when he thought of this. And it was the kind of laughter that couldn't be stopped. Xie Danqiong is really too talented. He has so many ideas. Now that they were completely at ease, everyone was overjoyed. During this journey, everyone was originally serious and anxious. But they definitely didn't expect that the second half of the journey would be spent in laughter. This was all thanks to Xie Danqiong. Everyone thought so. Everyone immediately sped up. If they could make it there in time. If they could rush to catch him before the swelling all over Xie Danqiong's body disappeared. How satisfying would that be? Instantly, they were eager to return home. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. This morning, the Demon Empress asked Shui Leihan, "Shall we have dinner together tonight?" Shui Leihan nodded and said, "Sure." Hearing this, the Demon Empress was slightly relieved. "Looks like it's not today." Shui Leihan looked up at the sky and said lightly, "I want to be alone for a while. Meditate." The demon empress didn't say much. With a move, she disappeared without a trace. At this time, it was most taboo to have someone show concern, especially if the person involved was a man, the kind who was usually very manly. Or they would say, "I care about you, that's why I'm so concerned about you. Are you confident? Can you win? How do you feel?" And so on and so forth. But in reality, in a battle between experts of the same level, every time you ask such a question, it's equivalent to adding another layer of psychological pressure to the other party. When this kind of pressure accumulates to a certain extent, it may lead to a bad result of turning victory into defeat. Because you've already crushed yourself. The Demon Empress was also a top expert of the world. At the same time, she was also a woman. She understood this very well. So at this time, she chose to retreat. Shui Leihan's white clothes fluttered. His footsteps were steady as he slowly walked out of the demon palace. Then, with a faint smile, he walked along a quiet path as if he was taking a stroll in the park. The demon empress guessed wrongly, or she was misled by Shui Leihan's reaction. The date of the final battle was today. Today's noon. This was agreed upon long ago. It couldn't be changed. Shui Leihan was waiting for the time to come. At this moment, there was no sadness or joy in his heart. He didn't even feel victory or defeat. Looking up at the white clouds floating in the sky, gathering and dispersing impermanently. Looking down at the flowers blooming and withering in the mountains, Shui Leihan suddenly felt extremely satisfied. He no longer had any worries about the upcoming battle. He was relaxed and carefree. At this moment, Shui Leihan suddenly felt that someone was approaching at flying speed. The person's whereabouts were erratic. His aura was hidden, but his strength was unusually strong. He had already reached the top of the world. At least, he was an expert of the same level as Diho. Although it was just a feeling, Shui Leihan had already realized that this person was not only an expert of the same level as Diho, but also a top expert of the same level as himself. But he stood with his hands behind his back. He didn't turn back, waiting for this person to come. No matter who it was, even if the saint and the 4 fairy gods came together, Shui Leihan would definitely not turn back. The person stopped a little behind Donghuang. An elegant voice said, "Your Majesty Donghuang, let me fight this battle." The voice was elegant, but the tone was resolute. There was no room for negotiation. Hearing this, Shui Leihan frowned and finally turned around slowly. He couldn't help but be stunned by what he saw. In the entire world, in the 3 realms, there were too few things that could make Shui Leihan stunned. But the scene in front of him was an exception among exceptions. It was also an unexpected surprise. The reason for his shock was actually very simple. The person in front of him was dressed in white. He was tall and stood with his hands behind his back. He had long eyebrows and a crown on his head. He was gentle and elegant, but also had a majestic aura. He was handsome, but also had a murderous and domineering aura. It was actually another Donghuang Shui Leihan. To see another Donghuang Shui Leihan in front of him, whose strength was not inferior to his, was an extremely rare and strange thing. Shui Leihan frowned. Although the scene in front of him was unexpected, it was still reasonable. He asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" "I am the Lord of the Eastern Royal Heavens, Donghuang Shui Leihan." That person stood with his hands behind his back. His gaze was gentle with an unparalleled sharpness. It was Shui Leihan's usual gaze. "I am Shui Leihan." Shui Leihan smiled. His smile was actually very pleasant. Pretending to be Donghuang in front of Donghuang without any scruples could actually make Shui Leihan smile so pleasantly. Strange things happened one after another today. "I believe you should know that I won't agree," said Shui Leihan. In fact, the moment he entered Donghuang's sight, he had already recognized who the person in front of him was. Although he was surprised by the person's cultivation, he was still the same person. "Your Majesty, I appreciate your kindness. But today's battle belongs to me alone. Please go back." The person who came was Xie Danqiong. At this critical moment, he used some unknown method to run out and make it in time. Xie Danqiong said indifferently, "But you promised me before that a man can't live without integrity." Dong Huang, can you go back on your word? Dong Huang shook his head. A broken promise is a broken promise. That was just a temporary measure. You don't have to take it to heart. Xie Danqiong was silent for a moment. Then he said, Are you afraid that Dong Huang's reputation will be tarnished because of me? Or are you actually afraid of losing? Shui Leihan was silent. Then he said, If you say so, then so be it. Xie Danqiong gritted his teeth. Can I take it that you think I'm not a match for the archer god? Dong Huang smiled indifferently and didn't comment. What if I insist on going? Xie Danqiong was furious. Heaven Imperial Court can afford to lose Dong Huang. Shui Leihan finally looked at Xie Danqiong and said seriously, But Heaven Imperial Court can't afford to lose any of your brothers in the land of tribulations. I hope you can understand that this battle belongs to Shui Leihan alone. Shui Leihan said indifferently, Besides, I have absolute confidence in winning. Absolute confidence in winning means that the archer god will be defeated or killed, but Dong Huang will also die because of it. At most, only the half-crippled Shui Leihan will survive. Is that right? Xie Danqiong frowned and asked. Chapter 26:13. Between experts of the same level, there was no need for any pretense. One sentence was enough to poke the nail in the coffin. Everyone was extremely honest, without the slightest bit of falsehood. Xie Danqiong stood quietly and didn't speak for a long time. Dong Huang didn't speak either and walked towards his destination. He was about to pass by Xie Danqiong. Xie Danqiong suddenly said quietly, Dong Huang, that promise has become my inner demon. Shui Leihan suddenly stopped in his tracks. Dong Huang had thought that there was nothing in the world that could stop him, but he stopped because of this sudden sentence. Inner demon. Inner demon. If the inner demon wasn't removed, it meant that there was no way forward. Xie Danqiong didn't turn around. The two of them just stood facing each other, side by side. You face the south, I face the north. Both of their faces were exactly the same. Dong Huang, my cultivation has improved greatly, and I've already broken through to the Jasper Flower realm. Xie Danqiong said the second sentence quietly. Then he said softly, I've already broken through to the Jasper Flower realm. Dong Huang Shui Leihan was silent. I won't lose. Xie Danqiong said, because what I use is also a hidden weapon. And the arrow god's arrow is nothing more than a hidden weapon. If you were to fight in this battle, the best result would be the death of the arrow god and you being seriously injured. Then your cultivation would drop, and you would never recover. Xie Danqiong said quietly, I've been thinking about that battle on that day. Since that time, I've been searching for Dong Huang's way of fighting, imitating it and integrating it into my martial arts. At our level, there's no need to be obsessed with any move. Which move? I'll take your place, to feel that battle. I can feel that you can undoubtedly kill the arrow god. However, your cultivation base and cultivation realm will drop by at least 80%. And you'll never recover. To yourself, to your family, to the country, to the world, to the heavenly palace, there are all kinds of disadvantages and no advantages. The only two who will benefit are the saint and the heavenly devil clan that's about to arrive. Xie Danqiong finally took a step back and faced Dong Huang. He looked straight into his eyes. Compared to you, I'm still half a step behind you. I'm not as good as you. If we were to fight head-on, I might not be able to defeat the enemy that you can defeat in the end. I can easily deal with a hidden weapon expert like the archer god, but you may not. In the path of martial arts, there were mutual engendering and restraining each other. Purely relying on strength to crush others and using strength to break through all techniques might not be suitable for those of the same level of strength. I believe Dong Huang understands this much better than I do. Why force yourself? Xie Danqiong said quietly. This is the truth. I believe that you won't go against your conscience and deny it. Now that the great battle of Tianke is imminent, I, Xie Danqiong, am confident that I can recover even if I am injured in the battle. But you've engaged in a completely unnecessary battle here, and you've even suffered unnecessary injuries. He will never be able to recover. Such a brainless method is really unwise. Xie Danqiong said in a deep voice, "My words are undoubtedly unpleasant to hear. However, in the end, there was only one meaning. You are stronger than me. However, when it comes to this battle, you are inferior to me. So let me fight in your place. I will get rid of my inner demons, and you will preserve your strength for the future. There's one more thing. I'm confident that I can make the archer god retreat in the face of difficulties and still preserve his strength and life. Can you do it? If you fight, you will only kill him." Xie Danqiong said. Shui Leihan frowned and pondered. After a long time, he asked softly, "Xie Danqiong, do you really have an inner demon?" Xie Danqiong was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Dong Huang. Dong Huang also looked at him quietly. The two of them suddenly burst into laughter at the same time. If there were outsiders here, they would definitely be scared out of their wits. Because in front of them were clearly two majesties of the Dong Huang, laughing heartily at each other. South Forest. It was completely silent. The fierce wind blew the treetops, and the whole forest unexpectedly made a sound like a tsunami. The archer god, dressed in white, stood on the treetop of the tallest tree. Or rather, it was not accurate to say that it was the treetop, because the archer god was only standing on the topmost tree. The surrounding trees were all blown askew by the strong wind, but this tree was the only one that didn't move a single inch. Even the tree was completely still. He stood quietly with his eyes half closed, waiting quietly. Waiting for the opponent to come. Dong Huang would definitely come. The surrounding thousands of miles of land had already been covered by his divine sense. Other than Dong Huang Shui Leihan, who could enter without any obstruction, no one else could. Even the Tian Ke Saint wouldn't be able to sneak in without alerting the archer god. In this battle, the archer god only wanted one thing: fairness. He would not allow anyone to interfere with this battle. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and looked towards the northeast. For a moment, the wind and clouds gathered in the sky. A long howl broke through the air, suppressing the fierce wind and the whistling of the whole forest. South Forest. The scenery is indeed good. In a flash, Dong Huang's figure had already appeared in midair. He said elegantly, "Brother Archer God, the battle between you and me here is enough to be passed down as a much-told tale." The Archer God said coldly, "The hatred between us covers the sky. How can there be a much-told tale?" Dong Huang smiled and said, "Brother Archer God, aren't you a little too anxious? The battle hasn't started yet. I'm afraid it won't do you any good." The few words before the battle were just passing through the door. Both of them knew this. At this moment, there was nothing to say. However, words could damage the opponent's morale. Perhaps a sentence, intentionally or unintentionally, could disturb the opponent's state of mind, which was enough to affect the outcome of this battle. At this point, he had finished speaking. The archer god did not speak anymore. Because he knew that even if he spoke again, he would not be able to gain anything. This Shui Leihan was so magnanimous from the very start, and her reply was indeed a little too narrow-minded. Therefore, he was ready to attack. His gaze suddenly focused, and his entire person seemed to have disappeared from this world. He was clearly still here. However, the feeling that he gave off was gone. Dong Huang laughed loudly and retreated. In an instant, he had already retreated 300 feet away. He smiled and said, "Archer God, the South Forest is full of greenery. This is equivalent to your home ground. Unleash your full strength completely. Don't disappoint me." The archer god's gaze flickered. He looked at Shui Leihan with some surprise. 300 feet. This distance was neither close nor far. To deal with an ordinary expert, or even an ordinary expert at the peak of the saint level, this distance was definitely enough. If it was a little further, the archer god was also confident that he could kill with one arrow. However, to deal with Dong Huang, it was not enough. It was far from enough. This distance was really a very subtle one. Besides, this was an absolutely safe distance for him. The archer god understood. This distance was definitely not a distance that ordinary people could comprehend. Only experts at the peak of the saint level could comprehend it. Moreover, only those who had reached the peak of the saint level in terms of secret weapons, at least close to his level, could accurately grasp it. This safe distance. If others were standing too far away, then there would be more chances for his arrow to change midway. As long as there was a chance for change, there would naturally be countless chances of killing with one arrow. Or if they were standing too close, of course, the path of his arrow would be relatively fixed. However, if the distance was closer, it would instead increase the chances of killing with one arrow. After all, the arrow was a weapon that relied more on speed. The shorter the distance, the more threatening it was. However, 300 feet was an extremely subtle distance. To an expert of his level, especially when facing an expert like Shui Leihan, it was truly a distance that was close to helplessness. No matter whether it was advancing or not. Whether it was retreating, it would give the other party a considerable amount of initiative. However, if he were to immediately attack now, he would only lose his edge and it would be difficult to achieve anything. That day when they first faced each other, they were just testing each other's skills. Shui Leihan did not do so because he obviously did not realize it. Why did he suddenly become so smart today? There was no room for optimism in today's battle. In the distance, Shui Leihan's hands were empty. With a swipe of the air, a shiny sword suddenly appeared in his hands. Dong Huang lowered his head and stared at the blade. He said lightly, "Archer God, you are the one who challenged me in today's battle. You shall make the first move. I, Shui Leihan, have never taken advantage of others and made the first move in my entire life." The archer god almost cursed. "You make it sound nice. If you make the first move, I will instead have increased the chances of killing you. Because as long as you attack me, the distance between the two of us will change. But you actually let me make the first move. If I had the confidence to make the first move, would I still need you to call for me? Are you trying to trick me?" Acting all sanctimonious and well-behaved, however, the other party's aura was already rapidly condensing and increasing at an unprecedented speed. The wind and clouds in the sky surged. Clouds from all directions came whistling like thousands of galloping horses, then whistling away, then whistling back again. The archer god roared and finally made the first move. The light of the arrows was like lightning, instantly filling the sky. Luo Hua City, Heavenly Armament Pavilion. They are fighting. Zi Xiecheng looked at the sky on the other side and clapped her hands subconsciously. Finally, she could truly heave a sigh of relief. They were fighting and Xie Danqiong was still within her control. There was nothing to worry about. Zi Xiecheng was not worried at all about Dong Huang's battle. With Dong Huang's earth-shattering cultivation, he would at most be slightly injured. His life would not be in danger. However, if Xie Danqiong were to fight, the nature and consequences would be greatly different. Even though Xie Danqiong's cultivation had improved greatly, he was still a hair's breadth away from Dong Huang. In a battle between peak experts, a hair's breadth could determine life and death. For Dong Huang, it might be a Pyrrhic victory, but for Xie Danqiong, it was very likely that he would be defeated and killed. Therefore, Zi Xiecheng could finally rest assured when she saw that the battle had finally started. Speaking of which, Zi Xiecheng was not completely unworried and unconcerned about Dong Huang. Dong Huang treated Zi Xiecheng like his own daughter and cared for her in every way. Zi Xiecheng would not go so far as to treat Shui Leihan like a father, but she still felt a little close to him. Chapter 26:14. But this time, it involved her husband and her brother. She had to eliminate the possible disaster before it sprouted. Besides, Zi Xiecheng had complete confidence in Dong Huang. Dong Huang would never lose. No matter who it was. Let's go. To the confinement room. Let's go take a look at that guy. There shouldn't be any problem if we let him out now. Things have already been settled. It seems like we can't win the argument if we don't let him out now. Zi Xiecheng was all smiles as she led the way. At the door of the confinement room, Zi Xiecheng was stunned. When he opened the door, he only saw a few twisted dragon tendons lying on the ground. They were like a few extremely tired snakes, curled up and resting. There was no one in the confinement room. As for Xie Danqiong, he was long gone. It was empty. Zi Xiecheng was stunned at the scene in front of her. After a long while, she finally roared, "Where is he?" The guard in charge of the confinement room fainted in fright the moment he saw it. "Master Xie Danqiong, you're really my master. This master has really screwed us over? But, this master's meridians and blood vessels were all controlled just now. All of his cultivation was sealed. Even his divine sense and divine soul were all locked. His body was also wrapped around by 7 or 8 dragon tendons. The dragon tendons were all tightly knotted. How could he escape from such a confinement? This was simply a miracle. There were no traces of the door being opened, no traces of the lock being touched, no windows in the confinement room, and no traces of the room being destroyed. But the person locked inside was gone. Inconceivable, incomprehensible, inconceivable miracle. Zi Xiecheng stood there for a long while. Slowly, she finally understood. Her face was as white as jade. Her face was flushed red with embarrassment and anger. She stomped her feet fiercely. "Xie Danqiong, how dare you lie to me?" She finally understood. Xie Danqiong's purpose of coming here was not to ask for her help at all, but to absolve her of the responsibility. Because Xie Danqiong was still battling in the demon emperor heaven. No matter what, Zi Xiecheng could not avoid this matter. No matter if Xie Danqiong won or lost, Zi Xiecheng would have to face the blame of her brothers. "Why didn't you stop him? Don't you know how dangerous this matter is?" Even though he wouldn't say it out loud, he had such thoughts. Zi Xiecheng would feel it. At that time, it would be very difficult for her to make a choice. Or rather, it could be said that she had no choice. It would be even worse if Xie Danqiong were to die here. Zi Xiecheng probably didn't have the face to face Chu Yang and his brothers anymore. Therefore, it was impossible for Zi Xiecheng to let him go. She would even capture him personally. Confining himself would cut off the possibility of him going to war. In view of this, Xie Danqiong simply took the initiative to deliver himself to the enemy's doorstep. "I'll take the initiative to ask for your help. Then, I'll let you capture and detain me." Then, he would spread the news of, "I'm very safe." This would prove that he had tried his best to stop them. Moreover, he had used extreme measures. "But if I escape by myself after that, then no matter what happens, it will be my own decision. It has nothing to do with you at all. I did stop them, and I even thought that I had stopped them, but you still managed to escape. If something really happened to you, even if they could understand me and forgive me, could I really understand myself? Forgive myself? Young Xie, you must come back, you must." Zi Xiecheng smiled bitterly. She looked up at the sky, where the wind and thunder were already raging. The battle over there had already begun. There was no way to stop them anymore. Just as Zi Xiecheng thought earlier, the matter was already settled. There was no point in making any more futile efforts. She could only let out a long sigh. "Xie Danqiong, you're really something." Zi Xiecheng sighed in her heart. But she also heaved a sigh of relief. Xie Danqiong had been able to escape from this place in such a bad situation. And he hadn't been able to detect it until he had seen it with his own eyes. This undoubtedly proved that Xie Danqiong's cultivation had surpassed his own at the very least. Because it was absolutely impossible for him to break such a restriction without at least 3 days of time. And the most important thing was that if Xie Danqiong wanted to impersonate Shui Leihan to fight, he must first get East Sovereign's consent. If it was really a death trap, East Sovereign would definitely not agree. And since East Sovereign had agreed, Xie Danqiong definitely had the power to fight. At the very least, there would be no risk of death. Thinking of this, Zi Xiecheng was slightly relieved. "Divine Spirit, follow me to the southern forest at full speed to watch the battle. Meng Wuya, immediately pass on the news of Xie Danqiong replacing East Sovereign to the Tianji Intelligence Department. Let them inform Mo Tianji as soon as possible." Zi Xiecheng flew up. In an instant, she had already turned into a ray of white light. The divine soul of calamity also followed him silently. Chu Yang and the rest hastened their journey. Even though they knew that Xie Danqiong was very safe now, they were still worried about East Sovereign's safety. Therefore, they did not slow down at all and rushed at full speed. They were already close to the Demon Emperor Heaven. The Demon Emperor Heaven is in front. Chu Yang was a little relieved. And Luohua City is not in the central area? If we rush there from here, I believe we will reach our destination soon. Hearing Chu Yang say so, everyone finally heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, they were almost there. This whole journey was really exhausting. However, at this moment, Mo Tianji, who had been paying attention to the latest news, said, "The battle between East Sovereign and the Archer God has officially begun." Everyone was shocked, but they all felt that it was a pity. It's a pity that we couldn't be there to watch such a battle of the century. What a pity, that's right. This is an extremely rare battle. If we miss it this time, we might not have another chance. It's really a pity, everyone was discussing and sighing. Although they were not far from the battlefield, it would still take some time to get there. Even if they managed to get there, they might not be able to see anything exciting. Anyway, the battle had already started. Since they were destined not to make it in time, and during this battle, everyone and all the forces would pay full attention to it. It would definitely attract everyone's attention. They believed that nothing major would happen in the outside world. Then why would they rush and be so tired? Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. But Emotonji suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God! This is bad. What's wrong? Why are you making such a fuss?" Chu Yang and the rest frowned and asked. These few days, Mo Tianji was shocked 3 times a day. This was definitely not his usual self. Could it be that Zi Xiecheng had tortured Xie Danqiong again? Xie Danqiong is missing. Mo Tianji's lips were trembling. He used some unknown method to escape from the confinement room where sister-in-law imprisoned him. Now, the one fighting in Southern Heaven Forest is most likely not Donghuang Shueleihan, but Xie Danqiong, who insisted on fighting on her behalf. When this news came out, all the brothers were dumbfounded. What's going on? Didn't they say that sister-in-law had subdued Xie Danqiong and imprisoned him completely? Why is there a change now? He has already gone to the battle, and the battle has already started. It's like this. Mo Tianji hurriedly explained as he hurried on. After he finished explaining, everyone was furious and couldn't control themselves. Xie Danqiong is too much. How can he do this? Beat him up when we see him. Bastard. He's just a bastard. Chu Yang frowned and said worriedly, Xie Danqiong is most likely not a match for the Archer God now. The Archer God was not at a disadvantage when he fought with Donghuang previously. Xie Danqiong is fighting on Donghuang's behalf. I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Shueleihan, this bastard. Let's go quickly and hurry to the location of the battle. The brothers didn't waste any more words and immediately increased their speed to the maximum. He's really born to be tired. GMO and Luo Kudi sighed. This Xie Danqiong has become more and more cunning ever since he became the Heavenly Emperor. This time, he actually deceived sister-in-law. When we meet later, let's join forces to beat him up. This time, it's most likely not our turn. Luo Kudi was not confident. Didn't you see how Boss and Mo Tianji looked like they wanted to eat him up? I'm afraid that no matter whether Xie Danqiong wins or loses this time, he's doomed in Boss's hands. Just based on the fact that he deceived sister-in-law, Boss will definitely not let him off. He deserves it if he doesn't let him off. Nothing should happen, right? Definitely not. It definitely won't. Xie Danqiong is in our group. No one can compare to him in terms of hidden weapons. Even if he can't win, he can always escape. This is a decisive battle, you idiot. And he's representing Donghuang, not himself. Donghuang's face is also on him. No matter if he loses or escapes, Donghuang can't afford to lose this face. Since he's representing Donghuang to fight, he has to bear this responsibility. What the fuck, isn't it like that? That means he can only fight head-on. If he can't win, he can't run. This is not easy to handle. Let's hurry. Everyone was burning with anxiety as they rushed away. In the sky above the southern sky forest, there were already several people watching the battle. Below, the battle between the two parties involved in this battle of the century had already reached a white-hot level. The outcome could be decided at any time. The reason why it was like this was because the battle mode of these two people was very different from ordinary decisive battles. Separated by about 3,000 feet or so, the two parties launched their attacks. Occasionally, Dong Huang would rush forward and retreat in an instant. In between, they were as fast as lightning and as fast as a white steed. The two people's attacks, methods, positions, the cultivation that they displayed, their experience, their precise judgment, and so on, all of them made the onlookers gasp in amazement. Do I still have monthly votes? Chapter 26:15. I was too focused on exploding and wrote the wrong chapter name. The first 820 chapters should be 810. 21 should be 20. This chapter is the real 821. But I can't change the chapter name. I can only apologize here. It's my negligence. Even the Saint Monarchs and the Demon Empress, who were watching the battle, were dazzled by it as they exclaimed in surprise. This was a battle that was completely different from any other battle in the history of the Heaven Imperial Court. However, the danger involved in this battle was far more than any other battle in the history of the Heaven Imperial Court. The two of them were walking between life and death at any time. They were wandering between victory and defeat at any time, going to the entrance of the netherworld and back again. However, the strangest thing was that the two of them had never engaged in close combat since the beginning. It was so strange. Another arrow pierced through the air. Dong Huang also moved forward almost at the same time. His sword aura surged for 3,000 feet and pierced through the arrow god. However, he immediately realized that the arrow god that was pierced through was actually a tree. The real arrow god had already drawn his bow and arrow in another direction. Just as the archer god was about to complete his attack, Dong Huang had already retreated 300 feet away like a stream of light. He was fully prepared for the next wave of attack. The arrow god's arrows and Dong Huang's sword intertwined in the air to form a huge net. The intensity of the attacks even made the people outside unable to see what was going on inside. The huge net that covered an area of 3,000 feet was unimaginably fine. Beside the Demon Empress, an ordinary-looking person sighed slightly and transmitted a message. The winner is about to be decided. Xie Danqiong won. The Demon Empress also nodded slightly. If it was me, I definitely wouldn't use such a battle method. But I have to admit, perhaps this was the only way to defeat the archer god in a head-on battle while suffering limited damage. Other than that, there's no better way except for both sides suffering. This is the only way to ensure the safety of both sides. This ordinary-looking commentator was the real Dong Huang Shui Leihan. The Demon Empress nodded. He also transmitted his voice. In this battle, the archer god made a mistake because he fell into a fixed state of mind. This was because he had always believed that the person standing opposite him was Dong Huang. He had no idea who the person in front of him was. He is a concealed weapon expert who is not inferior to him. This is a fundamental mistake. How can he not be defeated? Shui Leihan nodded in agreement. Indeed. For the past millions of years, the god of archery's secret weapon skills have been recognized as the best in the imperial court. No one had ever been able to catch up to him, but from today onwards, this number one in the imperial court of heaven would become two people who were neck to neck. Moreover, Xie Danqiong was much younger than him. He still had a lot of room for development in the future. However, the archer god's skill had already reached its limit. I don't have the strength to advance any further. The Demon Empress smiled and said, "That is destined. Actually, after this battle, Xie Danqiong will be able to suppress the arrow god." That was because the archer god had gone through millions of battles in his life. However, this was the first time in Xie Danqiong's life that he was facing such a hidden weapon expert. It's true that both of them have comprehended something. But Xie Danqiong must have comprehended more. However, in this battle, it's still unavoidable that both of them will suffer. Shui Leihan said, "This is unavoidable. Their strengths are similar and their battle styles are similar. It's inevitable that both of them will suffer. However, they won't suffer from irrecoverable injuries. This is already extremely rare and commendable. The demon empress sighed. However, her voice was already filled with gratification. However, at this moment, another unforeseen event occurred. Dong Huang, who was in the middle of the battle, suddenly let out a long howl. With a smile, he said calmly, "Brother Archer God, you've already shot me thousands of arrows. Now, it's time for you to see my secret weapon skills." The Archer God's pupils shrank. He said, "No wonder Dong Huang could use such skills to contend with me until now. It turns out that your majesty is also a hidden weapon expert." Dong Huang, who was opposite him, said in a low voice, "I also know that you haven't shot your strongest arrow yet. Today's battle between you and me will definitely have a winner. For this last strike, I'll give you an advantage. We'll use our secret weapon to determine the winner." At this point, the Archer God's expression finally changed. Using his secret weapon to determine the winner. This advantage given by Dong Huang was not small at all. At this moment, the Archer God finally understood the fundamental reason why he had been unable to achieve anything and even had his hands tied. He had only treated him as Dong Huang, but not as Shui Leihan. An emperor who ruled over a part of the world would always have the grandeur of an emperor. Even when fighting with others, he would definitely not use his secret weapon to attack. However, martial artists did not have this restriction. Dong Huang was an emperor, but Shui Leihan was a martial artist. The other party had always known his trump card, but he only understood his bottom line at the end when the other party said, using his secret weapon to determine the winner. As the ruler of a part of the world, Dong Huang was actually a secret weapon expert who was not inferior to him. Since the other party dared to say that he would use his secret weapon to determine the winner with the Archer God, who had been famous for 1,000,000 years, then he must be a top-level secret weapon expert. There was no doubt about this. He actually did not know such important information until now. He had actually lost the initiative right from the start. Before the battle even started, he was already destined to lose. Such a situation made the Archer God feel inexplicably aggrieved. The other party knew himself and his enemy, and handled the battle with ease. However, he was kept in the dark from the start. If he did not lose this battle, then it would be really unreasonable. The Archer God instantly wanted to adjust. However, Dong Huang did not intend to give him this chance. The long sword in Dong Huang's hand suddenly waved violently, and then it left his hand. This throw, in anyone's eyes, was nothing out of the ordinary. However, because of this sudden throw, the Archer God tensed up from head to toe. He did not dare to be negligent. He did not dare to hesitate. He did not dare to be negligent. He suddenly pulled the green longbow, and the aura around him actually exploded at this moment. When the Archer God shot his arrow, no one could see where the arrow was. This was the consensus of the Heaven Imperial Court. No one could be an exception to this. In fact, including today's battle, before the Archer God shot the last arrow, no one could see every arrow he shot. No one could. No one was an exception. But now this arrow, this last arrow, was completely different. But everyone could see it clearly. The bowstring was clearly pulled, the bow was clearly drawn, and the arrow was clearly shot out slowly. No one thought that the Archer God's most powerful arrow was this arrow that could be clearly seen. It was not those invisible arrows. This arrow was the Archer God's trump card, his strongest skill, and his ultimate skill. Everyone felt that they had been forcibly pulled out of this space, and watched the arrow slowly move forward. This arrow was shot out, and the southern sky forest within a radius of 10,000 feet was blown askew by the strong wind. It was completely still in an instant. It maintained the state of being blown by the wind a moment ago, messy and still. On the other side, Dong Huang's sword had also been thrown out. Just as Dong Huang made his move, the sword that was thrown out split into two. 2 into 4, 4 into 8, 8 into 10, 32, 14. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky was filled. Opposite the countless long swords in the sky, an arrow was coming. Even if there are thousands of swords, I will definitely pierce through. This arrow gathered all of the Archer God's essence, energy, and spirit, and all of his cultivation. All of it. After realizing that Dong Huang was also a concealed weapon expert, he immediately threw everything aside. Almost as if he had become a Buddha on the spot, he shot out the ultimate arrow without any distractions, body and mind. Wind and thunder surged. Only, the mountain of swords that Dong Huang had sent out was already covering his head. One arrow against 10,000 swords. Outside, everyone clearly heard a tremor. That sound. It seemed to resound in the depths of the soul. Then, an unprecedented explosion occurred at the critical moment. The entire southern sky forest was blasted into the air by the power of the ultimate collision of two great powerhouses. Empty. Two muffled groans sounded at the same time. On Dong Huang's shoulder, a clear bloody hole appeared, connecting the front and back. On the opposite side, the archer god also had a short sword stuck in his right chest. The two were still separated by 10,000 feet, standing face to face. Suddenly, they laughed at the same time. This battle is really satisfying. These words came from the mouths of the two facing each other at the same time. The injuries of the two men were not light at all. In fact, they were very serious. However, at the time of the explosion, no one knew when the two of them had been injured. I lost this battle. The archer god's expression was somewhat disappointed, and he said softly, Dong Huang, as expected of Dong Huang. You can actually defeat me in my strongest field. For the elves who had always been arrogant, personally admitting defeat was simply worse than death. At this moment, the archer god's mood could be imagined. There is no winner or loser in this battle. On the opposite side, Dong Huang smiled faintly. Everyone is tied. The archer god flew into a rage. You think I can't afford to lose? A win is a win, a loss is a loss. I don't know if you can afford to lose, but in any case, I really can't afford to lose. On the opposite side, Dong Huang said softly, otherwise, you wouldn't only know that I'm Dong Huang. I was lucky to have this advantage, and this battle was even more lucky to win, so it's only right that we are tied. Hearing this, the archer god was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly burst into laughter. A loss is a loss, no matter the reason. I only know that you are Dong Huang, but I neglected your true self, which is already a huge mistake. How can I not lose? But this time, I lost quite comfortably, not at all unconvinced. In the face of Xue Leihan's super open and above-board demeanor, the archer god suddenly felt that the person in front of him was actually very pleasing to the eye. This irreconcilable enemy was pleasing to the eye. At this moment, Dong Huang opposite him said, Brother archer god, since the battle is over, I can officially tell you now. Chapter 26:16. His body floated up into the air. With a warm smile, he said softly, Actually, there's no need for a battle between you and me. Because there's no reason for a battle between us. He didn't say, I didn't do it. Nor did he say, you were deceived. But there was no need for a battle. There was no reason for a battle. But it was equivalent to saying everything. The archer god shuddered. His eyes widened and he shouted, Make yourself clear. But Dong Huang had already flown thousands of feet to the front of the demon empress. Then, the white clouds surged and shrouded everyone. Not a single figure could be seen. Then, the white clouds surrounded a few people and started to float backward. The archer god's gaze suddenly became extremely complicated. He understood the meaning of Xue Leihan's words. But it was because he understood that he felt uncomfortable and lost. What the hell was going on? The archer god was a fairy. Fairies were pure, simple and honest. But it didn't mean that they were all fools. Looking at Xue Leihan, leaving quickly, the archer god suddenly roared, Dong Huang. He flew up like lightning and chased after him. In the clouds, Xie Danqiong and Xue Leihan had quickly exchanged identities. Seeing the archer god chasing after him with the short sword still in his chest, he didn't care at all. Xue Leihan sighed softly. Danqiong, I'm afraid that your words have provoked him too much. Don't let it backfire. Xie Danqiong said calmly, even if it backfires, it's none of your business. What I do and say has nothing to do with you. What matters is, my boss's reputation. Hearing that, Shui Leihan could only smile bitterly. Shui Leihan could only smile bitterly when Xie Danqiong answered with such a reason. Suddenly, he was filled with emotions. He said softly, "Back then, someone once slandered me. Zhao fought against the world in a fit of rage because of this. Back then, Zhao and Ling Piaoping's interracial marriage attracted the world's attention. The demon race and the human race boycotted it together. I, Shui Leihan, also stood up at that time to protect my brother's happiness." Shui Leihan looked far away. He said softly, "Xie Danqiong, do you know? I, Shui Leihan, only have one brother like this. But the two of you have many. Do you know? Such a pair of brothers. Since time immemorial, in this starry sky, there has been no one more than you." Xie Danqiong smiled proudly, "But we both think that it's worth it. Isn't that enough? No matter what he did. As long as it's for my brothers, I think it's worth it." This was the other reason why Xie Danqiong had to replace Donghuang this time. It was also the most important reason. No one can slander my big brother like this. If there were, then kill them. Without pity. If the elven archer god believed Xie Danqiong's explanation of his identity as the Emperor of the East this time, that way, he would be able to avoid a future massacre. Otherwise, it was only because of Chu Yang's illegitimate child status that Su Wu had. It would definitely lead to a disastrous war that would affect the entire Heaven Imperial Court. Gu Duxing's Big Western Sky, Dong Wushang's Extreme Heaven, Ao Shiyun's Green Firmament Sky, Xie Danqiong's Ink Cloud Sky, Chu Yang's Heavenly Armament Pavilion's Demon Emperor Sky, and Mo Tianji's Heavenly Secrets Intelligence Department, which was spread throughout the entire Imperial Court, as well as GMO, Luo Kadi, and Rui Budong's teams. Tan Tan's forces would collectively go on a rampage. All the movements of these forces would directly trigger a catastrophe in the Heaven Imperial Court without the need for the heavenly demons to invade. The original forces in the Heaven Imperial Court might even be wiped out. Of course, the Heavenly Calamity Army would also be destroyed. In the end, only the heavenly demons would benefit. The most fundamental meaning behind Xie Danqiong's actions today was that he represented the standpoint of all his brothers. No one can slander my big brother in front of me. If you dare, then bring it on. You will have to pay the price. This was the common intention of all his brothers. No one was an exception. No matter how strong the elven race was, once they were faced with these forces that were enough to shake the entire Heaven Imperial Court, they would probably only end up disintegrating overnight. Other than that, there was no other possibility. At this moment, the archer god had already chased after them. He was like a meteor in the sky. Xie Danqiong stared coldly at the archer god's figure that was getting closer and closer. He said indifferently, "I will leave this elf to you. If you come to an agreement, the misunderstanding will be cleared up and everyone will be happy. If not, we will start a war and the elven race will be wiped out." After that, he moved and retreated to one side. The demon empress sighed and said, "Qianghua, have you ever thought about the heavenly demons that are about to invade? I'm afraid such a harsh statement is inappropriate." Xie Danqiong sneered, "But have they ever thought about my big brother? How can my big brother be slandered at will? My explanation just now, and now there is a chance to clear up the misunderstanding. This is already our greatest sincerity. Is this still not enough? As for whether the elven race can understand and grasp it, it depends on the elven race's fate. What does it have to do with me?" The demon empress and East sovereign sighed at the same time. Xie Danqiong's words were really overbearing. In the end, the elven race was only the target of deceit. They were also the victims. The conflict between the two sides was caused by this, but it was not to the extent of wiping out the elven race. However, Xie Danqiong's standpoint was like this. It was also in accordance with the laws of Heaven Imperial Court. The bigger the fist, the bigger the reason. No matter what reason you used to slander our big brother, the fact is that you slandered our big brother. If you didn't grasp the opportunity to clear up the misunderstanding between the two sides, then you deserve to die. What does it have to do with others? Since the conversation had already reached this point, there was nothing more to say. Everything had reached the extreme. There was no more room for negotiation. The two of them did not doubt that if the elven race dared to say something like, Chu Yang is the illegitimate son of the East Sovereign and the Demon Empress, then Xie Danqiong would immediately return to Ink Cloud Sky. Then the entire Ink Cloud Sky would be mobilized. Even if they had to fight to the last soldier, they would not let the elven race go. And as long as Xie Danqiong was the first to move, Dong Wushang, Ao Shiyun, Gu Duxing, Mo Tianji and the others would definitely not sit back and watch. They would also move. With these forces together, even if the elven race was strong, they would still be destroyed. Chu Yang's reputation could be used as a joke between the brothers. Even if it was a little too much, it was just for fun between the brothers. However, as long as outsiders spoke carelessly, they would not rest until they were dead. Even if Chu Yang himself did not mind and did not intend to do so, it would be useless. The brothers would automatically do it. This point, the East Sovereign and the Demon Empress realized at the same time. But it was also because they realized it that the two of them were even more troubled. When the rumors started to spread, why didn't the two of them immediately take action to clarify the rumors? Why did they have to fight without any explanation, causing the situation to go out of control and evolve into such a bad situation today? The wings of Chu Yang's tribulation were already growing. With the combined strength of tribulation now, it was enough to do things that even the East Sovereign and the Demon Empress could not do. This was strength. This was the hard truth. No one could deny it. But the elven race was so stubborn. They would not easily change their minds and original intentions. When these two equally stubborn forces collided, the result would be the elven race being destroyed and tribulation suffering heavy losses. The arrow god gradually approached and stared at Xue Leihan. Of course, he did not know that this Xue Leihan in front of him was not the East Sovereign just now. East Sovereign, what do you mean by this? The arrow god looked serious. Xue Leihan frowned and said softly, I have already said what I can say. This is not something that I can explain clearly by myself. You need to judge everything yourself. The arrow god stared fixedly at Xue Leihan. He wanted to say something but stopped. He actually fell silent. Xue Leihan's words seemed weak, but it was also the sharpest counterattack. If I say that I didn't do it, would you believe me? If I say that I did it, would you believe me? How can you believe me? How can you not believe me? These were all unsolvable problems. At this moment, someone suddenly exclaimed, What is this? His voice was filled with disbelief. The person who spoke was also an expert at the peak of the saint level. His purpose for coming this time was very simple. It was just to watch this battle of the century. However, after the battle ended, he inadvertently looked down and immediately discovered an extremely strange phenomenon. For a time, even with the mental fortitude of an expert at his level, he could not help but cry out involuntarily. Everyone involuntarily looked towards the direction of the voice. Just now, the short sword that Xie Danqiong shot out and the arrow god's arrow collided midway. Both sides had condensed all of their cultivation. At the moment when the two sides came into contact, the resulting violent explosion and impact actually lifted up the dense forest that was no less than a few thousand feet in radius. It flew up into the air. The area of the forest that was lifted up this time was unprecedented. The Southern Sky Forest was the most famous forest in the imperial court. The vegetation here was already densely distributed to a considerable extent. The roots of the trees and grass intertwined with each other, almost covering the entire ground. Such a dense forest was lifted up in one go, and the ground underneath was completely lifted up as well. This was originally a miracle that was almost impossible to happen. However, this person's eyes were sharp. He accidentally discovered that under the ground that was lifted up 1,000 feet, a large area of buildings was revealed. There were even traces of people. Seeing this scene, that person finally could not help but exclaim, The arrow god and Dong Wang's abnormal battle actually created an underground world? What kind of concept was this? Everyone followed his gaze and looked down. But at this moment, The plants that were flying in the sky finally came to an end and fell back down again. The demon empress frowned. With a thought, she flew out. Suddenly, Lu Yunshui waved her sleeves. The piece of land with the abandoned vegetation that was about to fall from the sky was lifted up by her sleeves. It flew to an unknown place. Chapter 26:18. The saint was about to vomit blood. Today, he had suffered too much of a loss. With every cheer that came from behind him, the anger in the sage's heart grew even greater. He had originally planned to watch the show with Shui Leihan, but in the end he had to go on stage himself. And he had to kill his own people. He had to kill them. The 10,000 saints' true spirits here were all carefully cultivated by him. Seeing that the day of harvest was about to come, he was forced to personally destroy this base. Thinking of this, the saint's heart was bleeding. But just like what Dong Huang had said, everyone knew that the mountain river sword was the greatest nemesis of the 10,000 saints' true spirits. Other than this, there was really no other way to completely destroy the 10,000 saints' true spirits, especially not to let them transfer cultivation to their master. Because of this, the saint had no choice but to take action. He had no choice but to take action. Under everyone's gaze, the mountain river sword suddenly shook violently, and a ray of sword aura shot out like a dragon. He roared, 10,000 saints' true spirits, give me your lives. As this sword was shot out, waves of blood instantly surged below. Another round of deafening cheers came from above. Shui Leihan's voice rang out. Your Majesty's cultivation is too high, as expected of the number one person in the heavenly court, too powerful, as expected of the saint. Everyone echoed. Xie Danqiong took advantage of the chaos and roared, dozens with one sword, hundreds with 10 swords. Come on, saint. After 300 to 500 swords, all the true spirits here will perish. Everyone shouted together, come on, your majesty. After 300 to 500 swords, all the true spirits here will perish. Victory! Victory! Invincible! Your majesty is invincible. Too awesome, 10,000 saints' true spirits. Last demon clown, mountain river sword moves, all true spirits perish. The battle below. It continued. The saint's eyes were red as he slaughtered. The crowd above was still cheering. Everyone above was happy from the bottom of their hearts. The 10,000 saints' true spirits base was finally destroyed. However, the saint below felt his heart bleed every time he killed someone. What the fuck is going on? The 10,000 saints' true spirits that I've painstakingly cultivated for so many years have yet to be put to use. How could I have killed them all by myself? Countless painstaking efforts, all for naught? However, he couldn't say anything. He didn't dare to say anything. Moreover, he had to pretend to be righteous. In this world, was there anything more tragic than this? Shui Leihan, Demon Empress, I am absolutely irreconcilable with you. The sage roared madly in his heart. It's so satisfying. It's so satisfying. Shui Leihan sighed from the bottom of his heart. I also think it's too satisfying. The Demon Empress smiled until her eyebrows curved. The most refreshing and comfortable thing in my life is none other than this moment today. Haha. The two of them laughed together. The two of them did not try to hide their voices at all. It seemed that he had deliberately spread the news to His Majesty the sage's ears. The sage was so angry that he almost had a cerebral hemorrhage on the spot. A strong impulse to immediately rush out and kill Dong Huang and the Demon Empress was stirred up, and it was hard to suppress. But now, there were so many people watching over here. No matter how powerful he was, he definitely couldn't kill so many people. Moreover, there were super experts like Dong Huang, Demon Empress, and Arrow God here. If he acted rashly, he would most likely be the one who died. Moreover, once his identity was exposed, he would really be a rat on the street. From the revered His Majesty the Sage Monarch to becoming the 1,000 Saints' true demon that was the enemy of the world. Then, everything would be over. He could only continue to kill. Falling into such a vile situation, even the shrewd His Majesty, the Saint Monarch, nearly vomited blood and died. Below, there were already corpses everywhere, and there was no sign of life. Finally, the 3 experts guarding this place rushed out. However, the moment the 3 of them rushed out, they didn't look for His Majesty the Sage to fight. Instead, they turned into 3 different directions and escaped. Shui Leihan, Demon Empress and Arrow God were guarding here, and they had long been on guard against anyone escaping. How could they let them escape successfully? There was a tremor in the air, and an arrow flashed. A person was already on fire, and even the last bit of his soul was blown into smithereens. This is the soul-chasing arrow. Arrow God was a little tired. Its power is great, but it is also extremely vicious. Once this arrow is shot, it will instantly destroy the divine sense and soul of the archer. I have never been willing to use it lightly, and I haven't used it even once in these millions of years. But today, facing the 1,000 saints' true spirit, I don't have such scruples. With the soul destroyed, I believe that even the 1,000 saints' true spirit can't do anything. As he spoke, Dong Huang and Demon Empress had already separated to block the other 2 and attacked with all their might. The other 2 were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow, barely holding on. In just a moment, they were already killed by the other 2, and their souls were also destroyed. The screams below were still continuous, rising and falling one after another. Demon Empress kept waving her hands, sweeping away the dust and smoke so that it didn't obstruct everyone's vision at all. Everything that happened below was seen by everyone. Everyone, cheer for His Majesty the Saint. Xie Dan Qiong let out a long sigh, and said with extreme schadenfreude, I can't watch it anymore, it's too cruel. He added in his heart, Saint Monarch is too pitiful. But I feel so good watching it, even the arrow wounds on my body don't hurt anymore. No one knew this Jade Flower Emperor, and someone immediately retorted, this is the 1,000 saints' true spirit, the most evil existence in this world. What's there to not watch? Every one of them should be chopped into meat paste. Don't abuse your compassion. His Majesty the Saint Monarch's way of doing things is the right way. His Majesty the Saint Monarch, you can do it. Xie Dan Qiong nodded repeatedly, and his attitude was sincere. My knowledge is shallow, and I am a good person. You are right, Your Majesty the Saint Monarch. You can do it, destroy the 1,000 saints' true spirit, and don't let the person behind the scenes get any benefits. The person next to him nodded and said, that's right, everything here depends on Your Majesty the Saint Monarch. Your Majesty has worked hard. Demon Empress Dong Huang laughed heartily upon hearing this. It's about time, let's go down too. Xie Dan Qiong swallowed a heavy pill, and instantly felt his body recover a lot. Xie Dan Qiong had deliberately created the situation in the previous battle. He had limited the distance between the 2 of them to a very subtle distance. And everything had turned out as Xie Dan Qiong had expected. Both of them had suffered heavy injuries. However, only their bodies had suffered injuries. Their vitality and spirit had suffered limited damage. So, they hadn't injured their foundations. Xie Dan Qiong's injuries had healed by 30% after he had taken a heavy pill. He hadn't fully recovered, but he had regained considerable fighting strength. The elf archer god naturally did not have a healing elixir like the heavy pill, but how could the elf race lack elixirs? In fact, in the fierce battle just now, he was able to shoot an ultimate move like the soul-chasing arrow to kill an expert at the peak level, which was already evident. It's time? Go down? Shui Leihan and the Demon Empress looked at him in surprise. When? Why do we have to go down? Wouldn't it be more satisfying to watch him kill his own people here? The archer god was instantly stunned. Kill his own people? What did this mean? If this was a reprimand, it would be a huge reprimand. The saint put in a lot of effort to kill the 10,000 saints' true spirits here, and you still say this behind his back? Isn't this too sneaky? If I'm not wrong, there should be one of his doppelgangers below. Xie Dan Qiong said lightly, moreover, there are countless heavenly treasures and resources here. These things should be divided among everyone, huh? At this moment, Shui Leihan, the Demon Empress and the Archer God looked at Xie Dan Qiong with a strange expression. You mean to take advantage of the situation? The archer god really did not understand. What was this young man thinking? Did he have any integrity? Others were killing until blood flowed like rivers, but he was spouting nonsense. In fact, he wanted to take advantage of others. Of course, he did not recognize that this guy in front of him was Dong Huang, who was fighting with him just now. Xie Dan Qiong had already recovered the aura of the Ink Cloud Heavenly Emperor. That was a unique aura that could be distinguished at a glance, just like how the elf archer god knew Dong Huang very well but did not recognize Shui Leihan. It was the same now. He was already very familiar with Xie Dan Qiong but did not recognize the Jade Flower Emperor of the Ink Cloud Heavenly Emperor at all. What are you talking about? How can you spout nonsense like this? How can this be taking advantage of the situation? Xie Dan Qiong said seriously, this is obviously enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. Not letting the saint take the limelight, cleaning up the dregs and returning a clean space to the imperial court. The archer god was completely speechless. So, words could be said like this? At this moment, the archer god had a feeling of reverence for this unknown guy in front of him. This kind of feeling was not felt even by the saint, Dong Huang, and the demon empress. Indeed, when a person was shameless, he was invincible in the world. There was no limit to shamelessness, no limit, no bottom line. After we go down, you guys are in charge of blocking the saint. You must hold him back for a while I focus on searching for the treasures. Xie Dan Qiong said. The demon empress had always been grateful that Xie Dan Qiong replaced Shui Leihan in this battle, so she agreed almost without hesitation. The archer god was a little stunned. What was the identity of this shameless fellow? He could actually talk to the demon empress and Dong Huang like this? And why did these words sound so harsh? The saint of the Fling clan had just exterminated countless 10,000 saints' true spirits here. Even if the saint did not care about the spoils of war here, shouldn't you at least ask for his opinion first? Why did you go up directly and even work with the demon empress to guard against the saint? This was too unreasonable, right? May I ask who you are? What is your name? The archer god asked cautiously. This is the new heavenly emperor of the Ink Cloud Heavenly Emperor. Her Majesty, the Jade Flower Emperor. Dong Huang Shui Leihan smiled and introduced. The archer god was in a mess when he heard this information. This wretched and shameless guy was actually a heavenly emperor. Chapter 26:19. The newly ascended Heavenly Emperor of Moon Sky, Jade Flower Heavenly Emperor, was actually such a shameless and wretched person who took advantage of others. It was truly a pity for such a good body. Such a graceful demeanor. No one was perfect. Brother god of archery, shall we go together? Shui Leihan looked at the god of archery and asked with concern, are your injuries serious? How could the god of archery show weakness in front of the opponent just now, especially now that Shui Leihan was so calm and full of energy? He subconsciously replied, I'm fine. I'm very good. After the battle just now, Shui Leihan actually seemed to have fully recovered, but he himself was still quite a distance away from full recovery. This was probably the difference in strength. Although the god of archery really did not want to admit defeat, he had to admit that Shui Leihan was indeed stronger than him. Just like that, the four of them went down together. Soon after, a few more people from the dark shadow followed. One of them, a white robe fluttering in the wind, was none other than Zi Xiecheng. The moment she jumped down, Shui Leihan and the demon empress noticed her. At this moment, the eyes of the two kings were filled with warmth. This was the daughter of my brother. The only bloodline. This was the daughter of my sister, the only descendant. The Lord was on a killing spree below, but he still maintained his elegant demeanor. Waves of blood rolled under his sword, and as far as the eye could see, this place had become a slaughterhouse. Listening to the almost continuous praises above, the Lord's face became more and more gloomy. The murderous intent also became more and more intense. The chilling intent almost covered the whole small world. This time, it was really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. However, who would have thought that Zi Xiecheng actually burned the land within a radius of 3,000 miles of Luohua City to the ground? Who would have thought that there was no more forest there? Instead, it prompted the god of archery to choose the southern forest as the venue for the battle. What was even more unexpected was that the battle between the two of them, an expected peak collision, did not hurt them at all. Instead, it brought disaster to the entire southern forest. This was definitely an unimaginable thing, but it happened right before their eyes. It exposed the biggest secret that they had painstakingly hidden. There were a total of 3 such bases, and one of them had already been destroyed. But no matter what, that was destroyed in the hands of the enemy. Now, the one here was destroyed by his own hands. How much effort did this take? Only then would he be able to establish one? It was ruined just like that. Not to mention, some people would be gone forever. Where could he find such a suitable person? The sage waved his sword again, and the hundreds of people in front of him screamed and fell to the ground at the same time. Their souls were extinguished, and their hearts were filled with rage. Shui Leihan had already gone to the extreme. Yao Xing, I will never forgive the two of you. You actually forced me to such a state. If he didn't take revenge for this, he wouldn't. I swear I'm not a human. If I let you die so easily, I would be letting you down. One day, I will definitely let you all taste the taste of becoming a myriad saint's true spirit. You will beg for death, but you won't be able to die. Just you wait. This one-sided slaughter had come to an end. When he leapt down, the sage had already notified his doppelganger at the first moment, allowing him to simultaneously start a massacre from the inside. But when he rushed down, he would immediately disappear. He couldn't appear again, and he couldn't leave behind any traces. In this way, other than protecting his doppelganger, he could more or less absorb some of the power of the myriad saint's true spirit and recoup some of his losses. But the key problem that had yet to be solved was, there were peak-level experts everywhere. How was the doppelganger going to escape in the end? The only feasible way was to sacrifice the 3 great demon commanders to attract everyone's attention, and then let the doppelganger escape by digging a hole underground. Right now, the doppelganger was probably thousands of miles away. The sage was finally completely relieved, and he continued his massacre with a cold face. As long as the doppelganger was fine, it was considered cheap. If the doppelganger was exposed, that would be the most terrible thing. The sage could still afford to lose the myriad saint's true spirit here. As long as he recovered the resources and treasures here, and spent some effort, he could still rebuild it with some time. But at this moment, protecting himself was still the most important thing. As for these people, if they died, then so be it. The sage could only comfort himself like this. If he wanted to rebuild a true spirit base of such a scale, even if he had countless resources, without hundreds of thousands of years of time and effort, it would be impossible. Your Majesty is indeed invincible and peerless. Shui Leihan's smiling voice came from afar. Such a huge base of myriad saints' true spirit was actually completely destroyed by your Majesty's sword, not leaving a single bit behind. The sage's face was livid. He said coldly, Shui Leihan, why aren't you coming up to help? What are you saying? If a few of them escape, that would be a huge problem. Shui Leihan laughed. How could I not know the stakes? I also want to help, but I don't have a divine weapon like the mountain and river sword. How about this? Lend me the mountain and river sword, and you go to one side to rest for a while. Leave the rest to me, let me do my best. How about it? When everything is done, I will return the mountain and river sword immediately, without any delay. The demon empress smiled sweetly. That's right, I can testify to this. If Shui Leihan dares to swallow your mountain and river sword, I will be the first to not let him off. I will definitely get it back for you. The sage rolled his eyes fiercely and snorted coldly. An impulse to swallow Shui Leihan and the demon empress alive rose in his heart. He didn't want to speak anymore. These two bastards sure know how to talk. Give you the mountain and river sword? If I believe your nonsense and really give you the mountain and river sword, it would be strange if I can still get it back. Such a naive and childish trick of trying to gain something without risking anything, and you actually want to use it on me? This is simply the biggest joke in the world. As for the demon empress, she is even more shameless. You actually testify? Who doesn't know that the two of you are in the same boat now? To think you can say such words to testify. If this sword fell into Shui Leihan's hands, perhaps Shui Leihan would feel embarrassed. It might really be returned. But with you, Yao Exen, as a witness, it would be a complete waste. It would definitely be a one-way trip. Unreasonable. This was a woman's privilege. Hurry up and do it. Is there any meaning in saying such things? The sage said extremely gloomily. Looks like your majesty still can't bear to part with the mountain and river sword. Shui Leihan shook his head and sighed. Isn't it just a sword? The demon empress said disdainfully. Do you have to treat it like a treasure? You don't even trust the two of us. I'm too stingy. We only brought it up because we sympathize with him and want him to rest. That's right. If he doesn't want to give it up, I don't want to take it either. My good intentions are treated as ill intent. How can there be such an ungrateful person in this world? And this person is the sage. The demon empress complaints kept coming. The sage was already so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Even the archer god at the side was stunned. He was also dumbfounded. The two of you are speaking too lightly. That's the mountain river sword. The #1 divine weapon in the heavenly imperial court. If it were me, I wouldn't hand it over either. This has nothing to do with being ungrateful, right? Of course, this was just this. Shui Leihan and the demon empress didn't stay idle, especially the surviving 10,000 saints true spirits who were escaping in all directions. Their paths of escape were completely blocked by the two of them. Boundless energy surrounded all of them in a large circle, allowing the saint monarchs to slaughter them. At this moment, the two of them were like herding sheep with a whip. They were doing it happily, while the sage was killing until blood flowed like a river, but he was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. And in this gap, Xie Danqiong had already sneaked into the building complex like a wisp of smoke. Who is that? Why is he entering and leaving this place so rashly? The sage frowned and asked. It's His Majesty, the Jade Flower Emperor. He went in to search for the remaining survivors. What if there are fish that escaped the net? Shui Leihan smiled and replied. Nonsense. Simply ridiculous. Under such a large-scale extermination, who would dare to hide in the building? Waiting to be caught like a turtle in a jar? Fish that escaped the net. Ridiculous. The sage roared. Xie Danqiong is obviously going to take advantage of them. After saying that, he suddenly remembered. Why would the Jade Flower Emperor suddenly come here? I clearly saw him in the big Western Paradise. Shui Leihan frowned. Your Majesty, have you seen the Jade Flower Emperor in the big Western Paradise before? May I know why the two celestial emperors have gathered? The sage knew that his mind was in a mess today, and he accidentally let his mouth slip. He said angrily, You, the East Sovereign, are not qualified to meddle in my affairs. Shui Leihan laughed. But you, the sage, are also not qualified to give me orders. If you don't want to say, then don't. Anyway, the Jade Flower Emperor is right in front of us. I'll just ask him himself later. Xie Danqiong, come out. The sage roared as he killed his own people. He won't come out for the time being. Since this is the base of the 10,000 saints' true spirit, there must be some resources there. His Majesty, the Jade Flower Emperor, said that he wanted to take some from there. Shui Leihan laughed. The great heavenly demon war is imminent. Mo Yuntian has experienced the invasion of the demons and his foundation has been damaged greatly. The Jade Flower Emperor's foundation is even weaker. It's reasonable to let him strengthen his strength for the future. I believe you won't mind and will definitely be happy to see this happen. The sage said angrily, Nonsense. What do you mean by happy to see this happen? Those things are mine. He jumped up and was about to rush in to stop Xie Danqiong. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The demon empress rolled up the remaining tens of millions of holy true spirits and sent them to the Saint Monarch one by one. She said lightly, Your Majesty Saint Monarch, even if you are worried about the treasures inside, you still have to kill all these holy true spirits first. There are priorities in this matter. How can you ruin the big picture just because of a small profit? Your Majesty Saint Monarch has always put others before yourself. Public interest before private interest. I believe this is no exception, right? Besides, with your status, why would you care about those small treasures inside? Chapter 26:20. The saint almost vomited blood. The treasures inside? And some? What a bunch of bastards. Every base here had countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures collected over millions of years. There were also all kinds of strange metals, and there was even a star core. How could these be treasures in the ordinary sense? To think that you said it so lightly. So the loss isn't yours, but it's mine. If you really care about the things inside, then give me the mountain and river sword. I'll kill people for you and you go in to collect the treasures. Shui Leihan smiled. The 10,000 saints' sacred spirit cannot be let go. This concerns the world. Shui Leihan said earnestly. The saint snorted coldly. But the demon empress and East sovereign's words were righteous. Yes, no matter what happened now, no matter what important things were inside, it was not as important as eliminating the 10,000 saints' sacred spirit. There were so many people here watching, and in this world, it seemed that only his mountain and river sword could effectively eliminate the 10,000 saints' sacred spirit. He could not abandon the matter here and quietly keep the most important thing. And the mountain and river sword could not fall into the hands of the demon empress and East sovereign. Then if he did not kill, who would? His only hope was that Xie Danqiong did not know what was good for him and went to take the ordinary things first. But how could a heavenly emperor not know what was good for him? He had to kill quickly and stop him. When the holy sage thought of this, he suddenly let out a roar and completely displayed his strongest combat strength. A magnificent sword light suddenly exploded. Boom! Even many of the surrounding buildings were smashed into smithereens. The 10,000 saints' sacred spirit that had been slaughtered to less than 5,000 were killed by the power of one sword. They were all killed. Not a single person survived. Many of them had an intense look of confusion on their faces. Confusion, anger, fear. These people were really not the 10,000 saints' sacred spirit, but the coaches of the 10,000 saints' sacred spirit. These people had all seen the saint's clone before and naturally recognized that this crazy executioner looked exactly the same as the saint's clone. Even the aura was the same. This was obviously their master, the true home of the 10,000 saints' sacred spirit. But why would he suddenly want to kill them? There was no reason for this. Perhaps, even in death, they would not understand why they had died. We have sacrificed everything for you in this dark and sunless place. It will help you cultivate the power to conquer the world, to provide you with an endless supply of power, but today, you are actually so crazy, sparing no effort to kill us? Furthermore, in an instant, all of them were controlled. No one was able to speak or ask any questions. It was like a group of mutes facing a bloody executioner who was like the god of death. Such a feeling. Let them truly die with grievances. It's fine if you don't give us a reason. But why don't we even have the chance to ask questions? Everyone looked around, and as far as their eyes could see, there really wasn't a single living person left in this myriad saint's real spirit base. The saint's figure flashed, and he was about to rush into the building complex to stop Xie Danqiong from collecting his spoils of war. Shui Leihan coughed and said, "Your Majesty, you seem to have forgotten something extremely important." The sage asked, "And? What extremely important matter?" Shui Leihan laughed and said, "Can't you see for yourself?" The saint looked around but did not discover anything. He said impatiently, "What exactly is it?" Shui Leihan sighed. "You didn't see such an obvious thing? You're not pretending, are you?" The saint became even more impatient. "Why would I pretend? What are you trying to do? Just say it." Shui Leihan said in surprise, "Your Majesty, the one and only saint in the world, you killed the enemies down there and showed off your power. So many of us cheered for you in unison. Now that you have obtained such a glorious victory with the power of the mountain and river sword, it is enough to be recorded in the annals of history. Shouldn't you say something to us?" Everyone was quite tired just now. The saint was really angry when he heard this. Immediately, he understood that Shui Leihan's nonsensical words were simply to buy more time for Xie Danqiong, to delay his footsteps. He decided not to talk anymore. With a move, he was about to rush into the building complex. But a white figure flashed in front of him and the demon empress was already in front of him. She said indifferently, "Master Yun, answer a question of mine." The saint was so anxious that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. What question? The saint had to ask this question. The demon empress was even more resolute than the Donghuang. If he barged in, it was very likely that she would immediately start a war with him. This was not a good time to fight with her. The demon empress' face was cold. She questioned loudly, "When I was rushing back to the demon emperor's heaven from the extreme heaven, was it you who set up that ambush? Were you the one who did it?" The saint was stunned. He said angrily, "Nonsense. Demon Emperor, are you crazy?" The demon empress asked relentlessly, "Answer me directly. I'm only asking you, is it you?" "It can't be me." The holy sage was furious. "Yao Emperor, are you trying to forcefully frame me under the bright light of the universe?" The demon empress said indifferently, "What you said doesn't count. Whether it was you or not, I will find out sooner or later. However, I have to say something first. If I have evidence and prove that it was you who did it, I will definitely kill you." The saint was so anxious that he was in no mood to argue with the demon empress. Seeing that the demon empress had stopped talking, he was about to rush in. But he heard the demon empress say, "No matter how secretive you are, you can't hide it from the world. The heavens had eyes, and they would not let a matter sink into the sea forever. Whatever you do, the heavens are watching. Sage, you should be prepared." The sage didn't pay any attention to him and continued to rush forward. But another figure flashed. The Jade Flower Emperor, dressed in white, had already walked out of the ruins of the building complex. She walked over as if she was taking a stroll. The saint was stunned and stopped in his tracks. Since Xie Danqiong had come out, he must have looted all the resources. At least, those important things must have been taken away by him. There was no use in going in now. Xie Danqiong made a very free and easy expression when he saw that everyone was looking at him. He spread out his hands and said with a wry smile on his face, "What's really surprising is that the base of the all-holy real spirit is so big. But it's empty inside. There's nothing inside. This is really surprising." Shui Leihan asked in surprise, "Nothing at all? Your Majesty, Jade Flower Emperor, did you see wrongly or found the wrong place? How can there be no resources at all in the 10,000 Saints True Spirit base?" This question also answered the question that everyone present was wondering about. Xie Danqiong said with a bitter smile, "There's really nothing. How could I find the wrong place? I've searched every room and every secret underground warehouse. Indeed, other than some food, there's nothing at all. This is really strange." The demon empress frowned. Could it be that the 10,000 saints' true spirit ate, drank, used up all of it? This seems to be the most reasonable and probable explanation. Xie Danqiong frowned seriously and nodded. "I heard that the 10,000 saints' true spirit eats everything. Not to mention heavenly treasures and strange metals, they even eat feces. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so notorious." That makes sense. The Jade Flower Emperor is so knowledgeable. Today, we've opened our ears again. The East Sovereign and the Demon Empress nodded in agreement. The others were flabbergasted, and dumbstruck. What kind of words were these? What the hell was this? The 10,000 saints' true spirit even eats feces? Furthermore, these words came from the mouth of the Supreme Celestial Emperor of a generation. Furthermore, such ridiculous words actually had the East Sovereign and the Demon Empress standing by the side with a serious expression on their faces. Everyone was a little dizzy. Was this real or fake? Could it really be real? Otherwise, the 3 great kings wouldn't make such a joke, right? It should be more or less like that, right? There were already some busybodies who flew in to take a look. When they came out, they shook their heads. "It's really empty? There's only some food left. There's nothing else." This 10,000 saints true spirit base is really too poor. The Saint Monarch's blood rushed to his head, and his face turned red. He almost spat out blood. Which one of them wasn't a smart person? Everyone knew that the Jade Flower Emperor must have taken it away, but it was obvious that the East Sovereign and the Demon Empress were supporting it. Who would have the guts to offend the three sovereigns? Wouldn't that be tired of living? Thus, everyone agreed. Yes, this 10,000 saints true spirit base is too poor. I really didn't expect the 10,000 saints true spirit to be such a bunch of poor bastards. Nonsense, how can they be 10,000 saints true spirit if they're not poor? That makes sense. Everyone, today's matter has proven that the 10,000 saints true spirit is truly a strange existence. They don't have their own souls and thoughts. Xie Dan Qiong looked at everyone and solemnly said, especially the master of the All Saints true spirit. He's a typical bastard without parents. He's a heartless bastard. Everyone, you must be careful in the future. Don't let such a bastard take advantage of you. Be careful. Once you're controlled and become a 10,000 saints true spirit, it's like being controlled to kill the person you love the most. Even though you know it's painful, you still can't help but do it. That's the most tragic and cruel thing in the world. Xie Danqiong said earnestly. Shui Leihan nodded and reminded, yes, everyone. According to what I know, there's definitely more than one base of the 10,000 saints true spirit. Since there's one here, and on such a large scale, there must be others. Back then, when we exterminated the 10,000 saints true devil, we destroyed a lot of bases like this before we could confirm that it was completely wiped out. Chapter 26-21. Everyone, you must be more careful when you travel the world in the future. Pay attention to the movements in this area. This is an important matter that concerns the future of the imperial court. You must not let your guard down. Shui Leihan said seriously. Yes. I've heard of this before too. A guy at the side pretended to be knowledgeable and said, the two celestial emperors, His Majesty East Sovereign and Her Majesty Qianghua, are right. I've heard of it too. Although the owner of the 10,000 saints celestial spirit is evil, there's another secret that no one knows. Evil people will be dealt with by evil people. Everyone asked in unison, what's secret? How is it that evil people will be dealt with by evil people? This person shook his head proudly. It's said that there's a prerequisite for using the 10,000 saints celestial spirit. After finding the 10,000 saints celestial spirit, the wife of the person behind the scenes has to sleep with him for a night. Only then can the process of activating the 10,000 saints celestial spirit be activated. After so many years, just the height of the cuckoldry, to say that it can hold up the sky is an understatement. It's really impressive. Ha. As soon as this sentence came out, Cloud Master's face changed color instantly. He stared at this guy who was spouting nonsense. In his heart, he had already sentenced this guy to death. No, he must make him beg for death and suffer in agony forever. Shui Leihan was also displeased. Damn it, although you don't know, Cloud Master's wife is my biological sister. Although I've long refused to admit that I have such a sister, I can't let you humiliate her like this. This way of saying it is too perverted. How can you be a bitch? You've gone too far. The owner of the 10,000 saints celestial spirit certainly deserves to die. But what does it have to do with his wife? Shui Leihan said with a dark face, such groundless accusations, and even tarnishing the reputation of an unrelated person, is a great sin. That person's face instantly turned pale. He bowed repeatedly. Yes, Your Majesty East Sovereign is right. I was too quick with my words. Mine is not. The saint looked at him again and forced a smile. What's your name? That person's face turned pale. He replied with a trembling voice, I'm called Fatty Nyo, Big Fatty Nyo. Not bad. He's at the peak of the diviner realm. He was only one step away from the sage realm. Your future is promising. The sage said indifferently, do you want to work in the Holy Emperor Palace? That person would never have thought that he had casually created such a rumor and had actually obtained the recognition and favor of the sage. Perhaps it was because of his undisguised hatred for evil? Immediately, he was overjoyed. Many thanks for your Majesty's support. This subordinate will definitely be at your beck and call. I will do my best and be loyal to you until my death. The sage nodded, and it's rare for you to have such intentions. Then you should report to the Holy Emperor Palace when you go out later. The Holy Emperor Palace is short of manpower right now. Let's go there. That person was overjoyed and said, Yes, yes. Thank you, Sir Sage, for your guidance. This lowly one will rush there immediately and will not dare to delay for even a moment. Many people around him looked at him enviously. This guy is really lucky. Just because of a slip of the tongue, he actually entered the headquarters of Holy Emperor Palace. It seems that I will have to curry favor with him in the future. After tearing it down, there was an endless stream of congratulations. This big fatty Nyo's face lit up with joy, and he returned the greeting repeatedly. In his expression, he could not help but have a kind of superior air. Xie Danqiong, Demon Empress Shui Leihan and the others looked at this big fatty Nyo, speechless. Others might not know, but how could they not know? Since this big fatty Nyo said that he was a cuckold, he was destined to have a difficult ending. With the power of the sage, even if the Eastern Emperor wanted to protect him, it was already destined to be impossible to deal with such a person. The reason why he let him enter the headquarters of Holy Emperor Palace was only to make it more convenient to deal with him. Now, they could already foresee this guy's miserable ending. To think that he was still complacent here. He really didn't know death. But the three of them did not say anything. Such a person who had a slip of the tongue and casually slandered the reputation of others, his death was really not to be regretted. No matter who he slandered, even if it was an enemy or an evil person, this person's character was not to be complimented. Such a person would be useless to the world if he died early and was reincarnated early. Your Majesty Eastern Emperor, I rushed in on impulse just now, thinking of making a small fortune or something, but there was nothing. I was really disappointed. Before I went in, I even took 2 space rings from you, thinking that this place was so big that 2 space rings could be filled no matter what. In the end, I still came back empty-handed. Now, it seems that I was really too greedy. Here, I'll return the rings to you. Xie Danqiong took out 2 space rings and handed them over. Seeing this, the sage gritted his teeth and finally could not help but say coldly, Xie Danqiong, is there really nothing in your space rings? Not necessarily. This bastard actually dared to share the loot so brazenly in front of him. Did he think that the sage did not know that the 2 of you were in cahoots? Xie Danqiong's action undoubtedly added fuel to the fire, making the sage, who was already depressed to the point of death, even more depressed. Of course, Cloud Lord was clear about what was in his base and how much there was. He believed that no one would be clearer than the sage about everything inside. The materials and resources inside could definitely be described as enormous. And Xie Danqiong had clearly already plundered everything inside. And now, he handed over these 2 space rings to the Eastern Emperor. It was clear that he was going to split the loot in half, so the space inside was definitely full. His hands were empty. Go and fool a child. Thinking of this, the sage's heart was bleeding again. Under his unwillingness, he finally asked the question just now. Xie Danqiong smiled and said, Your Majesty Sage, although you're the only sage and the number 1 person in the heavenly court, I'm still a celestial emperor. You called my name so bluntly just now, it's a bit disrespectful. I don't want to answer this question of yours. Pestering endlessly. Now, Xie Danqiong had this idea, but the reason was impeccable. No matter what, I'm still the Jasper Flower Emperor of Moyunshan. Even if I haven't been in this position for long, my position has already been established. Even if you're the sage, you're not my superior. You should at least show some basic courtesy when talking to me. At the very least, you should respectfully address me as Your Majesty Jasper Flower Emperor, right? The sage nodded slowly. Your Majesty Jasper Flower Emperor is indeed proud and unyielding, a heroic young man. Well said. Xie Danqiong raised his head and laughed. Reporting to Your Majesty Sage, I borrowed these 2 space rings from the Eastern Emperor. There's nothing inside. Your Majesty Eastern Emperor and Demon Empress can testify for me. The Eastern Emperor took the space ring, glanced at it and said, "There's really nothing inside." The Demon Empress looked over and glanced at it in passing. She said, "There's really nothing inside. The design of this space ring is quite unique. I like it very much. This belongs to me." Seeing how the Eastern Emperor Demon Empress spoke so confidently and seriously, everyone couldn't help but feel suspicious. Could it be that this base was indeed an empty shell? But being able to exterminate the 10,000 saints' true spirits here was already a great gain. Without more spoils of war, it would only be a little less icing on the cake. Besides, even if there was, it wouldn't be their turn. The sage's chest rose and fell violently. A mouthful of blood that he had been holding back for a long time finally surged up to his throat, but he forcefully swallowed it back. "Great, acting right in front of me like this? Teasing me right in front of my face like this? You're sure that I can't flare up right in front of you, but I can't. When you, Shui Leihan, checked it, you intentionally opened it. Other people's cultivation levels are low, and because of the angle, of course, they couldn't see what was inside. But I saw it clearly. Inside were all rare heavenly treasures and mystical minerals. I can name every single one of them. Many of them were placed here by me personally back then. The 3 of us saw with our own eyes that there were things inside, but you, Shui Leihan, and the Demon Empress actually looked at the space full of space rings and directly said that they were empty. And that Demon Empress, Shui Leihan and Xie Danqiong were in cahoots to split the spoils right in front of their faces. You also went up to join in the fun and brazenly took a share, and then testified that there was really nothing inside. Can you be any more shameless? Can you be any more disgusting to me? That's all mine. Do you have any sense of shame, do you? The sage naturally kept these words in his heart and didn't say a single word. However, he already felt that he couldn't stay here any longer. If he were to stay here any longer, he would truly be angered to the point of vomiting blood and dying today. Xie Danqiong rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, Your Majesty Saint Monarch is not asking this because you want a share of the loot, right? Speaking of which, your contribution today is indeed the greatest. You, who wields the mountain and river sword, are truly worthy of being called the #1 person in Heaven Imperial Court. Unlike the others who can only play on the sidelines, your great achievement of using the mountain and river sword to destroy the 10,000 saints' true spirits today will definitely be passed down through the ages, passed down through the generations, and left your name in history." He paused and said embarrassedly, "You said that you spent so much effort and didn't gain anything. It's indeed not appropriate. But I really didn't gain anything. Why don't you wait for a while? When I return to Dark Cloud Sky, I'll immediately send people to collect and send a batch of heavenly treasures to His Majesty the Sage Monarch. Inside, there will definitely be the Heart of the Stars and various elixirs, such as the Resurrection Grass," he solemnly guaranteed. "I'll do what I say. As a celestial emperor, I still have this bit of eloquence and this bit of credibility. You won't dislike it, right?" The sage glared at Xie Danqiong fiercely and said coldly, "Let's go." These things that Xie Danqiong mentioned were all top-notch heavenly treasures with names and surnames. This was equivalent to stabbing another knife into the sage's wound and sprinkling a handful of salt on it. Chapter 26-22. The sage couldn't stay here any longer. He was worried that he would collapse and explode at any moment. His body flashed as he flew up and said in the sky, "Your Excellency Archer God, I have another important matter to discuss with you alone." Then the saint disappeared. Thus, he was talking about included the elf Archer God. The Archer God walked to Shui Leihan and the Demon Empress and said in a low voice, "Don't you have any intention of talking to me?" The Demon Empress said lightly, "You're not stupid. Everything depends on your judgment. Archer God, I admit that your cultivation is on par with ours, but this is not a reason for us to give you special treatment. If you want us to explain anything to you, you are not qualified to do so." The Archer God couldn't help but smile bitterly. Now that things had come to this, he could vaguely feel that he had done something wrong. However, the road ahead was still unclear. He couldn't find the right direction for now. The doubts in his heart were still there. However, the hatred in his heart was strangely not as sharp as before, and there was no room for him to turn it around. In that case, take care. The archer god flew up. At this moment he received a telepathic message from Xue Leihan. If you really want to talk to the Saint Emperor alone, it's better to call a few of your brothers as witnesses. This is good for everyone. The archer god couldn't help but pause in midair. He turned around in surprise and looked at Xue Leihan. With a swoosh, he disappeared without a trace. He understood what Xue Leihan meant, but he couldn't believe it. The Saint Emperor, the #1 person in the imperial court, was actually such a person. If he was really so despicable and shameless, how could he have been the Saint Emperor for so long? Especially today, he had eliminated the biggest hidden danger in the imperial court, the 10,000 saints' spiritual body. The Saint Emperor didn't seem like a bad person, but neither did the East Sovereign. But the Saint Emperor said that the East Sovereign was a bad person, and the East Sovereign also said that the Saint Emperor was the bad person. Then, who was the real bad person? A great traitor was loyal. Was this the kind of person they were talking about? Could it be that meeting the Saint Emperor alone this time would really be dangerous? Was this possible? Was this impossible? After the archer god left, he pondered over this question. He thought for a long time. In the end, he decided that he was not the only one who could decide the fate of the elven race. The other brothers also needed to be witnesses. He needed to make a judgment. They needed to make corresponding decisions. Therefore, he decided to bring his brothers along to meet the sage. He wanted to gather all the higher-ups of the elf race to meet with the sage. Wouldn't this be more respectful? In this world, only the 4 elven gods were known as the 4 strongest experts of the elven race. However, no one knew that the strongest expert of the elf clan was actually the elf clan. In fact, there were 5 of them. There was another god, the dark god. Dark elf god. However, this god of darkness was always hidden in the dark. Therefore, those who knew of his existence also knew that there were 5 strongest powerhouses in the elf clan, and they were the 5 elven gods. As for those who didn't know, they only knew of the 4 elven gods. In fact, those who knew about the 4 elven gods were already experts who had reached a certain level in the world. You've gained quite a bit today, haven't you? Xue Leihan looked at Xie Danqiong. It's all right. Xie Danqiong smiled. When these things are handed over to Big Brother, they will naturally become more valuable. The Demon Empress asked curiously, Xie Danqiong, will all the things that you and your brothers have gained be handed over to Chu Yang? Have you ever thought of studying them yourself? Xie Danqiong said frankly, of course we have thought about it and studied it, but we didn't get any results. We don't seem to have the talent. Fortunately, Big Brother is also exploring. When he has formed a fixed theory or experience, he will teach it to us. Our future will definitely be separated. Big Brother also hopes that no matter where we are, no matter what skills we will have the power to protect ourselves. But it's still not possible now. It's still far from the time when we can calm down and study these things without any distractions. Therefore, these directions can only be pushed back. Of course, there's another reason. If we hand these things over to Boss, we can immediately use them to their fullest potential. However, if we're left to fumble about on our own, we'll have to bear too many consequences of failure. And these consequences are the destruction of these treasures. The losses outweigh the gains. Xie Danqiong said lightly, the great heavenly devil war is imminent. We can't afford to lose any more. The Demon Empress couldn't help but sigh enviously. Having such brothers by our side really makes one envious. Xie Danqiong smiled proudly. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a furious scolding. Xie Danqiong, you little bastard! How dare you! The 3 of them turned their heads and looked over, only to see Zi Xiecheng rushing over like a whirlwind with a furious face. Xie Danqiong screamed when he saw the situation. His face was full of horror and he turned to escape. What Xie Danqiong was most afraid of now was Zi Xiecheng. There was no one else. However, just at the moment when he was about to move, both sides of his waist actually went numb at the same time, and he couldn't move at all. Xie Danqiong turned his head in disbelief, looked at Dong Huang and the demon empress beside him, and said with extreme grief and indignation, "You guys, just now, it was actually Dong Huang and the demon empress who took action at the same time to restrain this heavenly emperor in cloud. As for the purpose, it was very simple and pure. It was obviously to let him accept Zi Xiecheng's punishment." Xie Danqiong obviously didn't expect such a thing to happen even in his dreams. However, looking around the heavenly imperial court, the only person who was worthy of Dong Huang and the demon empress attacking at the same time was at most Cloud Lord. Should the Jade Flower Emperor, Xie Danqiong, feel very proud? But Xie Danqiong asked in grief and indignation. He really couldn't think of why these two people would do this. Why would they treat him like this? He had just helped Shui Leihan, and even gave each of them a space ring full of good stuff. How could they turn their backs on him? This was too unreasonable. You took my things, accepted my gift, and in the blink of an eye, sold me out. What kind of explanation was this? They were still talking happily just now, and in the blink of an eye, they turned their backs on him mercilessly. Not to mention that you are Dong Huang, who has such a high status, even if you are the most shameless hooligan, you would also have to take a break, right? Shui Leihan put his hands behind his back and said, "Xie Danqiong, don't blame us. We are helping your sister-in-law now. As your sister-in-law's brother, even if you don't thank us, you shouldn't blame us, right?" "Don't blame you? I still have to thank you." Xie Danqiong looked sadly at this extremely shameless Emperor Dong Huang. At this moment he almost burst into tears. "Now that you have caught me, I have to wait to be beaten up, yet I still have to thank you? How could there be such a thing in the world? Damn you, Dong Huang, can you be any more shameless? Energy would energy. Even if you are young, you don't have to be so indignant." The demon empress smiled. "I also told you clearly that no matter who little Z wants to beat up, we will catch them. Even if Dong Huang doesn't help, I will help. She can beat them up however she wants. On this point, she has no principles and no bottom line." Xie Danqiong was dumbfounded and speechless. He was dumbfounded. Why was this so? However, he didn't have more time to think. Zi Xiecheng was already in front of him in a hurry. Before he could say anything, he saw Dong Huang and the demon empress lifting Xie Danqiong up at the same time. With an infinitely benevolent smile, they said, "Little Z, you just want to beat this guy up to vent your anger, right? Here, I'll catch him for you. You can beat him up however you want, in whatever way you want to vent your anger." At this moment, Zi Xiecheng was stunned. After a while, she finally smiled with a red face and bowed. "Uncle Shui, demonic concubine, how are you?" Good, we're good." Shui Leihan and the demon empress smiled with gratification. It seemed that no matter what they did, no matter what they paid, they were already satisfied to hear the words Uncle Shui, demonic concubine. They were even a little overwhelmed by the favor. It was just a simple greeting. Was there a need to go so far? "Then I'll take this guy back." Zi Xiecheng looked at Demon Exen and Shui Leihan with some admiration. Go, good girl. Pa, do whatever you want, it's okay." The demon empress and Dong Huang hurriedly replied at the same time, "It's okay. We can break his arms or legs. As long as we don't beat him to death, we can do whatever we want. We can do it until we're happy and satisfied. It's no big deal even if we really cripple him." Xie Danqiong suddenly felt a chill in his heart. What kind of saying is this? What exactly is going on? Why can't I understand? Zi Xiecheng smiled and then turned to give orders. "Tie this guy up and bring him back. If he dares to do anything, break his legs. If he dares to struggle, break his arms too." Zi Xiecheng gave the order with a murderous look. Xie Danqiong closed his eyes sadly. "Sister-in-law, please spare my life. Spare your head." Zi Xiecheng said angrily, "I'll go back and pack up first." When Chu Yang and Mo Tianji arrive, Xie Danqiong, a good day that you'll never forget is coming. "Don't worry, I'm not interested in your life. I'm only interested in beating you up. As for whether Chu Yang and Mo Tianji are interested in your body or your life, it's hard to say. Xie Danqiong looked up at the sky and sighed sorrowfully. He looked at Zi Xiecheng with pleading eyes, trying to gain the sympathy of the people in front of him. But it seemed that no one cared about him. The tribulation's soul transformed into a gust of wind, and it wrapped Xie Danqiong up before it left swiftly. Zi Xiecheng bowed and bade farewell to the demon empress. Then, she jumped up and rushed back to the heavenly armament pavilion. Looking at Zi Xiecheng's departure, the demon empress heaved a sigh of relief. This child is so good. I just realized that her brows are so similar to my sister Piaoping back then. It's as if they were cast from the same mold. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.